It is now time for our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Greg Levine. Greg is Tree Atlanta's co-executive director and chief program officer. Greg has been with the organization for over 25 years and is responsible for all programming that supports the mission of Trees Atlanta. Under his leadership, Trees Atlanta has forged a strong partnership with the Atlanta Beltline and has developed the Beltline Arboretum in recent years. Additionally, he oversees neighborhood and city plantings, forest advocacy, and the urban forestry crew. Greg has a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture from the University of Georgia and is an ISA certified arborist. Greg, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited to do a keynote for y'all. It's always great to do a keynote for another tree group. As many of you know, you are probably members of Alliance for Community Trees, as we are. There are tree groups like us all over the country, and we share a lot and benchmark with each other, and that's how we are able to do so much. So I'm happy to be here and have some exciting things to talk about. I'm hoping that today, what you'll get out of this presentation is that we can all do more by just pushing that needle a little bit, testing new projects, having some small failures, and moving forward, because in the end, our cities need more. Most of our cities are losing canopy, and which creates more space for us to do work, but it also shows that we have to figure out better solutions. So what I'm going to talk to you today about are some of the programs that we started small and that we've grown, and one huge project called the Beltline Arboretum. So as we get started, I'll tell a little bit more about myself. As Scott had said, my background is landscape architecture. I've been at Trees Atlanta for 26 years, and we started off, when I started here, with just 4 people. And when we started off in 1985, we only had 1 person, of course. And our mission, probably very similar to your mission, is we're a nonprofit community group that protects and improves our urban forest, by planting, conserving, and educating people about the importance of trees. And when we say community, we mean community. Everyone that can help, they come out and are invited, and we hope feel supported by our organization to improve their canopy. Whether you're a 2-year-old coming out to plant trees, or you're a 85-year-old that helps give out coffee, we want to be as inviting to everyone as possible. So a little bit about the organization. As I said before, we're about 35 years old, and it's exciting. We've had a lot of growth in the last 10 years, but if you look at our roots were planting trees downtown. That was our main focus. We were started by Central Atlanta Progress, the Junior League, and the Atlanta Parks Department. But Central Atlanta Progress is the major organization that really wanted to start a tree group. They had seen information about tree people in Los Angeles, and they saw our downtown businesses leaving. We had very few residents living downtown, and they thought, how are we going to get people back downtown? And you can see on this picture on the left what the city looked like, and that was really about 100% of our streets. We had a dismal downtown tree canopy. And when I say dismal, I mean dismal. It's less than 1% when we started. You can see what it looks like, obviously, when you add trees and a few extra years. We started primarily because Central Atlanta Progress wanted to make it downtown livable. And when we say livable, it's the same reasons that y'all would be planting trees. You can see in this upper left-hand corner, 1960s, as I said, it was bustling in the 60s. It was still going well, 50s and 60s, but still no tree canopy. And then you got into the late 60s and 70s, and people started leaving Atlanta, and especially downtown. So we had to figure out a way to make the city more livable, which meant making the sidewalks more comfortable for walking, dealing with air pollution, flooding, because a lot of our neighborhoods that were on the wrong side of the city got a lot of our impervious surface runoff. So all of our water was running off into our neighborhoods, which was hurting those neighborhoods, and they were getting flooding, and people were leaving the neighborhoods around the city. And of course, beautification. In the end, one big reason why people start tree groups is to make their city look better, more beautiful, show the change of the seasons, and of course, all that makes the city more livable. But as I said before, we had 0% downtown trees. You can see them. When I say zero, you had trees here and there. But we've only gotten up to 3% downtown, and that's over 35 years. Where we've made our biggest strides, well, actually, you could say that's 3 times what we've had when we started. But downtown is a challenge because our downtown was created with very small sidewalks and very tight buildings. A lot different than a lot of the northeastern cities where you had wide verges and bigger sidewalks, a little bit different planning in the Northeast and even some in the Midwest than you have in many southern cities. So it brings a challenge. I'm gonna talk a little bit about our downtown as we go through this. But what's interesting is our downtown was only 0%, but our rest of our city, we had 48% tree cover. So we've got a great tree cover compared to most cities once you leave downtown, but kind of I have to say, a little bit of an embarrassment when you get into the city. But that was only one of the reasons why Trees Atlanta has grown and developed. As you can see in this far left photo, you can see some of Georgia Tech's great work, and they've basically been mapping out our tree loss from about 2008 to our last test at 2018. And what we're seeing is not only tree loss, but different neighborhoods are getting greater tree loss than others. And Georgia Tech had developed this program with the city of Atlanta to map out our tree loss. And Trees Atlanta got a Google grant to actually make it more usable for community. When I say more usable for community, we made it so that you could click on your own city council district, and you can see that I'm in Council District 2. I had to think about that for a second. And we have the worst canopy. So, one of the co-directors of Trees Atlanta has the worst canopy in his neighborhood, and he sees he's got 13%, and that the neighborhood next door to, or the council district next door has 25%. So it's a great tool for starting to show that you may have inequity in your neighborhood so that you can get more canopy planted in your neighborhood. So we do this with council districts and neighborhoods. So you can compare your neighborhood or your council district. There's a few other ways you can compare, but that's the best part of the tool for me personally. Also, you can see on the bottom left is a great wooded lot. Actually, it's about 5 houses. And to the right, you can see what it became just about 3 years ago. And we are losing a lot of trees because we're developing a lot more multifamily, which most urbanites think that's great. We get more people per less acre of land. So you're using land to the highest value for people capacity. But one of the challenges we're finding in multifamily is that they don't leave room for trees. When I say they don't leave room for trees, they may leave a right of way, which is between the sidewalk and the curb, but there's not a lot of green space around the development, not for putting back shade trees, not really much green space. So our zoning doesn't require a lot of green space in our multifamily. It's something that the city needs to work on. And as advocates, that's what we continue to advise and advocate for. One of the other issues that we find in the multifamily is often the place they leave room for trees is on the street. And unlike the Northeast, most of our power lines are above ground. So we aren't able to get shade trees in about 50% of our streets because one side we have power lines. We end up getting smaller ornamental trees. And the last picture, I hope you don't see this a lot in your cities, but we're having our smaller historic homes that are 1,800 to 2,000 square feet being torn down and replaced with a house next to the bulldozer here and replaced with 3,500 to 5,500 square feet of house. So where you had a small footprint, they're being replaced by a bigger footprint house. And right now we are working our tree ordinance, and hopefully this will continue to improve. But those are some of the challenges for the city, and we are seeing tree loss. It may be only 2 or 3% that we can actually measure, but that 2 to 3% is actually greater because some of what we see as trees are young pine trees that are regrowth from neighborhoods that during the downturn got left to regrow. So the quality of our forests are also going down. It's a big challenge, especially when you have so much canopy to lose. So I'm going to get into a little bit about our programs. As I said, with our mission, it's planting, conserving, and educating. And those are kind of the three branches of the organization. And you can see from left to right, we kind of have a raindrop for planting and a spear for protecting and a light bulb for educating. So a little bit about our planting programs before I get into the specific projects and programs, a little bit about what we've done over the last 30 years. It's really focused on community. So we've been focusing on community because planting trees downtown really wasn't enough to get really a bigger support group. So we started to go into neighborhoods, and when we went to neighborhoods, we started to bring more volunteers in. And last year we planted about 7,000 trees. And out of that 7,000, 5,500 were with volunteers. We'll see those exact numbers in a second. But what I want you to really see is that 40,000 volunteer hours. Before COVID, that was the biggest amount of volunteer hours we've had in the organization. And in 1990, when we started, we had a part-time volunteer managing the volunteer program. So, in the last 30 years, it's grown significantly. And our city, just like yours, it's because there's room to grow, and we need to grow to support the needs in Atlanta. This is a project in Piedmont Park, just an example. We did 150 trees in one day in 3 hours with about 150 people. Our board was out here on this project. It was a project where it's in our biggest park in the city. They did not have a lot of funding at the time, and we came in and made a huge difference in one day. And that's what's, of course, it's the beauty about trees. You see a tree you planted 10 years ago, and that little bit of energy you put in one day, you can see the return as a 30, 40-foot tree. You can actually get that in Atlanta because we have really fast growth, especially when you have got great soil. Like we pretty much have really great soil if it's not been destroyed by a bulldozer. So a little bit about the planting programs themselves. So actually in 2017, we planted about 6,700 trees. And this gives you a sense of the breakdown of the sizes of trees, since many of you are very familiar with planting. We planted about 37 15-gallon trees. That'd be 1,500 gallon would be pretty impressive, but 15-gallon trees. And those trees were completely planted by volunteers. Now, some of those actually are 30 gallons because we started adding 30-gallon trees to our volunteer program for the instant tree. I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then we planted 1,200 of the urban trees. And those are not with volunteers. Those are with staff or contractors. And then 1,800 one-gallon trees, which are primarily in our forest restoration program. We stopped planting bare root for the most part because we just saw a survival rate just very, very low. They get mowed over too easily. In a 1-gallon tree, you just get a much better root system. And as you'll also see, part of the forest in Trees Atlanta's eyes are native grasses and wildflowers. Because in a forest, when a tornado or a fire come through, what you have are meadows, or in the West, prairies. And so that's part of that whole urban forest. And there's so much good you can do by adding meadows to our green spaces and personal properties that we started getting involved in that as well. And of course, there's shrubs. And my staff doesn't really like to count the shrubs, so we don't have a count for you. But we do plant a lot of shrubs, and primarily about 99% of the shrubs we plant are native. So I was talking about native plants, native trees, a little bit about what we plant. We do plant about 75% native trees. It would be higher, but as I referred to before, the power line situation and the narrow verge, the area between the sidewalk and the curb, limits some of the native species we can plant, both because of heat overload and the power lines need something short. And frankly, the narrower the soil strip is, the harder it is to plant some of our native trees understory. They're just not tough enough to be in full sun and in poor soil situation, the majority of them. So we plant a lot of crepe myrtle. As you can see, Lagerstroemia, 7% is that. If you look at 8 o'clock, you can see that. That is one of our highest percentage of tree species that we plant. But of our native species, you can see Acer, which is maple, at 8%, and I think oak at 11 o'clock, 7%. But we also plant a lot of one-offs. When I say one-offs, it's very small percentages like Halesia, which is silver bell. We plant 1% of silver bell. And some of y'all are going, you plant silver bell? Yes, we do plant silver bell, which is Halesia diptera, two-winged silver bell. It's an example of finding the right tree for your urban situation. We plant silver bell all through our neighborhoods. Two-winged silver bell is very tough. Carolina silver bell, I would never plant in the right of way. It's just not going to make it for you. But the idea behind this, what I'm trying to show you in this graph, is that planting diversity is not only good because for diversity in wildlife and for pests, not wiping out all of your tree canopy. So always plant as many species as you can. And frankly, there's so many different situations that we find we have in Atlanta, whether it's full sun or shade or less soil volume or power lines, we need a lot of different trees. And frankly, the nursery trade is having a hard time keeping up with us. So the first program I'll talk about started in 1985, which is when the organization started. And it was started to improve downtown, like I said before. And you can see, again, a different photo here on the top area without trees, the bottom with trees, and how much more walkable that makes that street and how much more beautiful it is as well. These are too large for volunteers for the most part. It's a rarity when we do plant 2.5-inch caliper with big root balls with volunteers. So we do it primarily with contractors. Now, in the last 5 years, we decided that we would start doing it in-house, or at least a larger percentage of those trees in-house. And the reason why we did this, and I don't know if y'all have this problem in Ohio, but when you're a nonprofit and you're working with a contractor and they get a big job in, they push you to the back of the line. Well, our planting season is short. And if you get pushed to the back of the line, you could have missed the planting season. And if you have a contract with the city or with a developer or with a corporation to plant trees, and you get pushed to the back of the line, then you have a problem. And we found that that was happening more and more. So that's why we started doing our own program, and we plant about 60% of our big trees now. Now we're only counting on one contractor as opposed to 3. If you count ourselves, you can say 2 contractors, but 1 outside contractor. So then there's the Neighborhoods program, which started in 1991, about 5 or 6 years later. And it's, as I said earlier, it started with a volunteer who wanted to start planting trees in downtown, and he found this group that was planting them in town. Wanted to plant them in downtown neighborhoods, and we saw they were planting them in town, city of Atlanta, and he offered to help. So he was working 2 or 3 days a week for free for about 2 years, doing neighborhood projects, getting free trees, limited, almost zero budget. And that's the point here is that if you're representing a city that's small and you don't have a tree group, you can get started small. There's always a nursery that will give you leftover trees, and there's always people that want to make a difference. We are now in 100 neighborhoods planting every Saturday from October to March. And we plant in about 3 or 4 neighborhoods on a Saturday, planting anywhere from 30 to 100, I say 30 to 60 trees for the most part. So about 250 trees a weekend. And we've also increased the neighborhoods that we plant, the cities that we plant in. We started primarily in the city of Atlanta, and now we're in about 11 different cities with the same exact program. It's a great thing to do because the problem of downtown tree loss is not in just downtown, it's not just in the city of Atlanta, it's spreading through metro Atlanta. We're losing trees throughout 5 metro counties. In fact, we have 3 of the top counties right here near Atlanta of tree loss in the southeast. So Fulton County, Fulton, Gwinnett, and Cobb County, which Atlanta is right on the edge of, or inside Fulton County, 3 of the top 10 in the entire southeast. A lot of tree loss. So that's why we're spreading our messaging and our tree planting to those other cities. The other way that we've changed this program is, for the most part, we are planting in the right of way, which, remember, the area between the sidewalk and the curb. We've actually started planting in people's front yards, and the cities are funding this. They're funding this because they'd rather see the trees in someone's yard that they maintain for the next 20, 30 years in their own public property. So it's been a really growing program. Out of that 4,500 trees, about 600 of them are in front yards. It also gives you more room to plant large shade trees, which is super important. In 2005, we made another change. We started to actually maintain our own trees. For the most time, for the first 15 years of the organization or 20 years, we were contracting out maintenance. And again, we had the same problem that our maintenance, we would only get contractors to help us when they had time. So we were having a hard time keeping trees watered. And as you know, the heat load downtown, it makes it so you have to water. And so we were having a hard time keeping up with our watering downtown. And then our volunteer trees, as we grew our program, we were having a hard time keeping up with the watering with just our volunteers and community members alone. So we started having staff that helped water our neighborhood trees and completely watering our downtown trees. The beauty of this is we're spending very similar amount of money to pay contractors as to have our 3-person team as when we started, a 3-person team doing maintenance. And we got some trucks donated. And now not only are we watering in the spring and summer, but now we have the same amount of money helps us prune, mulch, fertilize, pest treat. So we just got to that tipping point when we had enough trees that we started maintaining our trees with our own staff. This is Israel here on the left. It's in the around 2012 or 2010. And he's putting an emerald ash borer trap to see if we have emerald ash borers. And we do. Unfortunately, they are here in the south, and we are trying to do our best to treat our trees that we've planted. And of course, we're losing ash trees just as y'all were and are in the Northeast and Midwest. Our conservation programs. So we started our conservation program for the main reason of making our forests more viable. And when I say more viable, I'm thinking about that they're actually not becoming a kudzu desert or an ivy desert with no diversity. And that's what we have in a lot of our urban forests. I know you'll have that same issue. We started this actually in 2000, and it started with a small federal grant. Urban Resources Partnership was the name of the grant at the time. And it was $30,000 to test how you actually do restore a forest. We created a handbook. We took a small green space in the city of Decatur, and we learned about how you remove species, and we've learned a lot since. You can see our favorite, and I have our staff members here listening to me, but our favorite staff people are these actually staff goats. And we do have a goat program. They are contracted out. We started that about 12 years ago, and they're great. They do great work, but that's just one way that you can remove invasive species. You still have to do mechanical removal, you still have to do hand removal, and you still have to use herbicide. Well, goats are great for eating kudzu and coming back several times. It's not the end all be all. You have to finish treating them with herbicide. And it's not a one and done, it's not a 2 and done. We're looking at 5 years if you really want to get invasive species out of your forest. And then you still have to go to a management program. So your first 5 years are really your restoration plan, and then you have to do a little bit of management. And that's what we're getting into, where we have a management staff that goes back into these green space just to spot spray, see if there's any issues in your forest. Where the first 5 years, you're having to hit hard and get rid of your invasive species. Now, we have very similar plants that you do. Kudzu may not be one that's real popular, but let me tell you, it grows a foot a day during spring and summer. So you can only imagine how horrible this plant is. Brought because of its ornamental value originally, and then for erosion during the Great Dust Bowl. They thought it would help with erosion, and it doesn't even do that. It sets big tubers, and there's really not roots that are connected all the way through. So soil still washes underneath it, but it's not really holding the soil that well. And it's a huge problem here, along with English ivy, wisteria, and Chinese privet. So this is an example of what it looks like for us. And 2008, we started this project in the city of Decatur. It's a woodland next to the cemetery. And we started removing kudzu. And in 2010, we pretty much got rid of our kudzu using goats and then herbicide. And then we started replanting in 2011 and 2013. This is what it looked like. So about 3 years, we start to replant in kudzu areas, sometimes even in 2 years. But again, if you really want to fight invasive species, think of it as a 5-year restoration plan, and then it becomes a management plan. You don't need as much energy or as many people, but you don't want to let it go, because our urban areas, we have too many vectors. We have neighboring yards that bring in kudzu or privet, and birds dropping privet because we have it all over our city. So now we have our education programs. So Connie and I are co-directors. We actually split the executive director job and break it into admin and operations and development, and then I'm in charge of programs. But the education program completely was gone in 2010 when we took over. And it was because in 2010, if you'll remember, that was a little bit of a recession, and we had to cut our education program, and it was one staff person. So when we took over, we decided that we were going to put both of our energy into redeveloping this. So let's start with, we divide our programs into two: adult education and youth education. And we have one person that focuses on adult and 2 or 3 that focus on youth. And our adult education, I could talk about this forever. Any one subject we could talk about for an hour. But one of our easiest programs that anyone can do is a speaker series, right? If it's just a one and done, you get one speaker to come in and a really great topic. We've had Doug Ptolemy come, who's he's a Northeasterner. Y'all know him probably as the bug guy. And we had 200 people come in a weekend to come hear him speak. It brings a lot more people to your mission by getting a speaker that is that has some, I guess, some national notoriety, as I can't say the word. So it's a really an easy program to do if you have those 4 times a year. And of course, you are doing a speaker series right now. Harder to do a conference, is a little bit more challenging, especially virtually. I don't like being here virtually, and it makes it that much more challenging for our educators. But the other 2 programs I'm going to talk about real quickly are our pruning program, which if you have a staff person in your neighborhood's program, they can usually handle the pruning program. We teach people how to prune through 3-class system, 1, 2, 3. Number 1, just education. How do you prune? The biology of trees, go on. And then the second class is, reviewing what you learned the last time and actually getting your hands on some pruners and practicing on some trees that hopefully are somewhat forgiving. We do all make mistakes when it comes to pruning. And then the third class is the hard class. We focus on difficult trees like American elm, Princeton. If y'all plant Princeton American elm, you'll know what I'm talking about. All the trunks come at one area and it gives you some structural issue. But if you've seen the original Princeton elm, I think they have things that break off and just grows right over it because it's that tough of a tree. But still, you want to learn how to prune the most difficult trees as well. We also have a certification program, which is a 7-class series, and it focuses on a pruning class, invasives, pest management, and community engagement. It's a 7-class series. We've been doing that for about 11 years, and we probably have at this point about 250 graduates, and many of those graduates go back in their neighborhoods and work on forestry issues in their own neighborhood. So you're sending your people out to go out and do more work, even if you're not touching it every day. And one of the last adult programs, but it's not the last, it's the last one I'll mention, is our docent program, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I talk about the Beltline. Our youth education, you got to start with the youth and the kids, because if we can reach more kids, they are going to remember the work we're doing and get into urban forestry or urban ecology or ecosystems and caring for those as youth. But they also work as educators themselves, because it's hard to say no to a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old that says, I want to plant a tree in my yard. So they're really the ones that get out and make the change in so many different ways. And I'm going to talk about just 4 of our youth education programs really quickly. There's a Scout Badge program where we try to help the Scouts get certain badges. One of them is tree identification. And then we have an in-school program that we've been doing for about 8 years. And our in-school program is where we go to one classroom 4 times, at least 4 times during the year. And we primarily 2nd and 4th grade. And we are in 50 schools right now. So we're reaching a lot of kids. And we didn't want to do the one and done. We believe that visiting a classroom over and over, those kids will actually take in more and it will make a bigger change in their life. And we're in 50 schools right now, and it's a program that continues to grow. And we are unfortunately doing that virtually right now, but at least we're still doing it. There's a Junior Tree Campers summer camp where their whole summer is spent outside, running around in the Arboretum, biking. It's very active. parents love this camp because the kids really do come back exhausted. It doesn't matter what we feed them, they're still coming back tired. And one of the good things about this program is it helps fund the in-school program from some of the tuition that we get from the camp. And then, of course, there's Youth Tree Team, which I'm going to talk about just in a second, but it's basically a workforce program for high school students. We started the youth education in 2012, and it continues to grow. All right, so there's the Youth Tree Team program. This is a new program. It's only 5 years old, but it's fantastic. And I'm going to say it's one of your neighbors, Indianapolis, that we learned this from. Kind of a neighbor, you know, compared to Atlanta, they're your neighbor. We have known Keeping Indianapolis Beautiful for about 15 years through our membership of Alliance for Community Trees. They've benchmarked here, we've been benchmarked there, but we came up to see their Youth Tree Team program and saw something that we thought we had to do. Benchmark is a great thing for your leadership to do, and I say go do it. Spend a little bit of money, you get a lot out of it. The way the program works is that you're looking at a 7-week program with having high school youth work 5 hours a day for 5 days a week. And the idea is to bring youth into green jobs, and especially bringing diverse youth into green jobs. I've been going to conferences for 25 years. I go to forestry conferences and I go to public garden conferences, and we've been hearing for more than a decade that we don't have good diversity in our staff and our visitors. And part of that is because people don't feel like they belong. And by bringing work programs is a way to bring people of all different backgrounds into your programming. So that's why we started it, but we also started it because we thought it would be good to get some extra maintenance help during the spring and summer, especially when it came to watering trees. So in 2021, even with COVID, we had 32 students. They got paid anywhere from $10 to $14. That's a wide gap. I know you're thinking, that's a big gap. How do you do that? The reason why we have a $14 salaries is we have a funder that insists on it for a few, like 6 of our students. So it's that salary goes to the most seasoned and the seniors, and they have to try out for that salary range. They're basically the leadership. So you might ask, you know, why else would you do a Youth Tree Team? Well, we know that the environment is changing and climate change is here, and that the way that we are able to educate people are through public programs. And again, what we're finding is we're having horticulture departments and forestry departments are shrinking because people aren't going into those fields. So we want to bring these jobs, as we're just one organization, but bring these jobs to high school students so they can see the joy of being in the green industry, but also that there is a whole line of different jobs. And part of what we do in this program is bring our youth to different green organizations. When I say that, we have 1 day a week where they get paid to go visit the botanical gardens and see the guy that grows little orchids in a tube, and they get excited about that you could actually be inside and still be in the green industry. Or we go to Georgia Tech and see some of their green infrastructure projects. So we bring them to other green jobs, but we also teach them how to be professional. So when they come into these green jobs, they're more ready. They know how to do an interview. They know how to save money. They know how to show up on time. So we're actually bringing our green youth to the first job, whether it's in the green industry or not, ready to work. And so, as I said, this is a job. And you can see the youth here in all these pictures. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they're doing here, but if you look at the picture to the right where they have the orange buckets, that is our day that we call Challenge Day. I call it Field Day, because we all remember as adults how we had field day, and you'd have contests on three-legged race or water balloons or whatever it might be. Our Challenge Day is for the purpose of seeing how the kids work, if they're hard workers, if they work well together, if there's leadership in the group, because they're interviewing for these jobs. And just to get a sense of how many people start the process, how many youth start this process, we had 120 applications last year. And then we had about 60 people that made it to Challenge Day, 68. That was the first real day in person. And then by the time we got to the volunteer day, which you can see the kids planting the trees in the top left-hand corner, we're seeing how their endurances and their follow through, and again, if they can show up on time, and seeing how they're working together, and that frankly, they're enjoying themselves. Because being in the heat in Atlanta in the middle of the summer is not easy. So you better think you're going to like what you're going to do. And so that's the second, actually the third part of getting a position in our youth tree team. And lastly, you actually do have to interview. We do interviews normally in person. It's 15 minutes. I think this is Demetrius here. You can see in the bottom, these kids get more dressed up than some of our staff do to come in for interviews. They take it very seriously. And they're not hard interviews, but it does give you a sense of the youth. And you have to make hard decisions, because in the end, we had about 50 kids that made it through the whole process, and we only had 32 positions. So the big thing here is that we really wanted kids to know that this is work. They're getting paid not just to be there. So the Atlanta Beltline is a project that we started about 15 years ago. And it's not a program until more recently. We kind of made it a program, but it's been a project. It's a giant project that we're working on. And it started actually as an infrastructure project. And a man named Ryan Gravel, who was doing a thesis project, had pulled up some old maps and some starts of trail projects that were kind of collecting dust at the city. He was a Georgia Tech graduate student, and he had basically created this infrastructure project that was following an old rail loop that went around the city. This rail loop used to deliver to in the industry and around the city, and it was a rail loop, and it had been abandoned for 50 years, and basically became a vector for problems, whether it be kudzu or people who are up to no good, or just basically ignored and trash dumped on. So he had gone to Paris after this great thesis project and saw what they were doing in Paris, and he lost like 14 pounds because he was walking everywhere. Came back, saw Atlanta, and was just distressed that he had this great thesis project sitting on the shelf. He started shopping it around, got the city council president on board, and started to make this a reality. Well, you can imagine what it will be. It's going to be an amazing project for the city, because it included, I'm going to go back to that last picture. It included trails, transit, redevelopment, new parks, over 1,300 acres of new parks, and it was a connector of the city. It was connecting 45 neighborhoods, reconnecting them. And often, you remember that expression, the other side of the tracks? Neighborhoods on one side of the tracks were thinking, that about the other side. So it really was a uniter instead of a divider. And you can imagine it would be great. You can see the huge difference it could be making and all the money and development that it would be. But it could be better, because we saw it was missing a layer, missing that green layer. It was missing the environmental piece. So we decided, why don't we do an arboretum? And so we saw this infrastructure project that was moving forward. And before it became a reality, we said, can we help? And Ryan was like, yeah, do whatever you want. That's what it's about. It's about bringing people together. It's a great idea. Why don't you just tout your arboretum, but I got to still sell this project. So we followed Ryan around, and we'd go visit a corporation or the Adair Park neighborhood or the city council and say, this is a great idea, but it's missing that final layer. It's missing on that triple layered cake, it's missing the icing. We need something that unites all these pieces, and it's that restoration layer. And our restoration layer was an arboretum. It is one giant experiment in an infrastructure project, but also for a botanical garden. As you can imagine, on rail sites, you already have contaminated soils. And it's interesting because for those in the horticulture area, the soil can change every 50 feet or 100 yards because it's along this rail corridor. And you have fill, you have polluted, you have lack of organic matter. So it's a good experiment that you can take data from And the other pieces that make it a big experiment is it's a huge collaboration. You could imagine going through 45 neighborhoods, the amount of input and opinions of what this should look like and be. And of course, you have an opportunity to test a lot of different plants because of the different soil types and the different ecosystems. You have a lot of different potential for testing, whether it be a wetland plant or an urban plant or some odd exotic that likes warmer winters. A lot of opportunity to test. Now, it is an exciting project. Like every infrastructure project, it has some challenges, and this is not to be separated from that. Basically, there's a lot of edge. You have a lot of opportunity for vectors coming through. You have construction challenges. They're always building along the belt line, and you can see that crane. They say it's Atlanta's most popular bird. They're always kind of taking little gaps of the arboretum meadows and scraping them up, and we're having to redo them. And then we have issues with, our partners. We have a great relationship with our partners, but we don't always see things the same way. This top left-hand corner is a beautiful part of the undeveloped corridor, and we don't think it needs to be touched. You've got these trees overhanging. You can imagine the path and the transit coming through, but our partners in Beltline Inc. really think that it's too secluded and too close in and maybe not safe, so they think that half of it should go and open it up. So that's a discussion, and we may have to just lose that battle, but that's what partnerships are about. You win some, you lose some. And then you have even developed properties that actually rent space from the Beltline and take away from some of the green space. In this bottom left-hand corner, you can see the beautiful sassafras tree. I know they're very popular in the Midwest, and we planted 220 sassafras trees. It was a beautiful grove for about 2 years, and then they took out about half of it, building a new building. And then as you can see here, those empty darkened windows, that became two restaurants that wanted a patio, two restaurants that wanted access to the Beltline. So you can imagine we got half of what was left, and they removed that and it became a patio. So we have to deal with constant change, just like our ecosystems and ecology. Some of it, unfortunately, not natural. It is a public space, which is a challenge, but it's also this great opportunity. And this is why any of your groups that can figure out a way to be part of an infrastructure project, part of a new park, you can make it better, and you can also help grow your mission and your organization by doing it. And by being part of this project, we basically had visibility to 45 neighborhoods every single day. We had new development with new residents being connected to our mission and our organization every day. And I say every day because we have repeat users. We have people who are recreate, as you can see, people biking. You can see this other gentleman with a bag in his hand. He's going grocery shopping. We have people that are there visiting from out of town who are taking our message and leaving town and taking it home with them. It's a captured audience. Infrastructure projects, especially linear ones, are captured audiences. All you need to do is educate people on it. And it's one thing to do a native plantings and all these great plantings, but when you get the arboretum level or a botanical garden level on it, it brings more people and more interest to it. And so we are a level 2 ArbNet accreditation from the Morton Arboretum, so we're an official arboretum. So the Beltline Arboretum also offers an opportunity to bring forestry to urbanites. And I'm gonna just give one specific example here. We're all about urban forestry, but we also care about tree issues throughout our state. And as you can see in the middle picture here, you can see the longleaf pine. Longleaf pine is a specific ecosystem that is disappearing in South Carolina and Georgia because they're not allowed to burn, which is they have to catch on fire and burn, and they've also been drained and built upon. And so we are bringing that issue to urbanites who then can help preserve these, because on the Beltline 2 years ago, we had 1,700,000 visitors on it. Any botanical garden and any forestry group would like to have that audience. So find a way that you can do your good work and grow your audience. And you can help other organizations grow their audience by being part of your program. So that's one way. to influence, it's the users that use it every day. But another way to influence people to your mission is to get corporations involved. And this big project allows for corporations to help come volunteer. Everybody wants to be part of it. They actually help financially, and they actually come and actually volunteer, whether it's mulching or planting or weeding. They can help us nonstop. And the good part about having corporations come do work with you is they don't only take that message to their home, but they take it to their leadership. And when that leadership hears about what we're doing, then they're more likely to send more volunteers out and also financial help. And if you're a nonprofit, that's always a challenge in growth, is getting that financial help. But another way that we influence is that the projects along the Beltline start to look at our landscape and want to be part of it. And when I say be part of it, that means mimic what we're doing there. And this top left, the left-hand corner is an old Sears building. It's actually the biggest Sears building in the Southeast from the 1920s. And now it is it's a market, and it's businesses and individual apartments. And they planted about 90% native plants. Can you imagine a big factory like this focusing on native plants? It's very unusual. 90% is pretty good. And they, again, are bringing those residents to seeing the same landscape that we have on the Beltline, and they're wanting to learn more about it. And then this little tiny planting on the bottom, that is in front of an apartment development, a new apartment development. I can tell you in Atlanta that normally you might get 5 or 10% native plants in an apartment development, and it's usually in the trees. This development was about 88% native plants. And we see more and more of that along our infrastructure project, our Beltline Arboretum, our urban forest project. So a lot of what we're doing on the Beltline and by planting trees as well, if you look at this project, it really brings all of our programs into one single project. Our planting program, our restoration program, our education program. This is a model and a showcase for all of that. And so we got to the point where we decided it's really not a project anymore. It's really an all-inclusive program. And restoration is part of this program. And as a tree group, you might think, why is Trees Atlanta doing meadows and planting grasses and wildflowers? Well, it's part of the forest. When part of the forest gets destroyed through a tornado or a fire, meadows move in. And we're mimicking that in Atlanta, where you can't necessarily grow trees, but you can grow meadows. And a lot of these meadows are along what will be the transit area of this project. It's a 22-mile loop, and it has paths and transit. Transit, after 15 years, still hasn't started, but they don't want to plant trees in that transit loop, so we plant meadows. And it's also a great opportunity to partner with more groups, like the Xeric Society and Autobahn, and they start helping us and we start helping them. What we found, I'm gonna go back to that slide. Also, it's a chance for research, which I'll talk about in a minute. Meadows in urban areas are pretty rare, and it's a really great opportunity to do a lot of research and testing. We would like to do more. We just haven't gotten to the point of getting that kind of money. But I'll talk about a program in a second. Tree diversity also. This is a place that you have so many people seeing the beauty of diversity in trees. And we as forestry groups want to educate people to not plant just crepe myrtles or Japanese maples or Bradford pears, 0 Bradford pears, of course, that there's so many great trees out there, and there's reasons to plant shade trees. And we planted over 100 species of trees already on the Beltline Arboretum. It's actually a lot greater than that at this point, but also it's a chance to show off some of those rare tree societies, like the Magnolia Society, and let them take part in display, or the Chestnut Society, which we know is so important to get the hybridized chestnut. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the chestnut blight wiped out the chestnut trees, the most important trees on the East Coast. And now the Chestnut Society is trying to hybridize an Asian chestnut with an American chestnut. We're giving them a stage to educate 1,700,000 visitors on the work they're doing. And I said research earlier. There's a couple research projects I'll just talk about real quickly because I know I'm running out of time. We do research ourselves. We get schools to help do research as well. We would love to see more research projects, but this gives, again, that one big experiment, it gives a place to do research. We try to take as much data in as we can so other people can help us do research. Some of our first research projects were done by these two kids, actually many other kids. Our camp does a temperature test in the middle of the path. What would you think you're going to find the temperature difference between the path and underneath the tree on the side of the path? You can see the numbers here, but think about what you think the temperature difference would be. On an average summer day, we believe it's about a 20 to 25 degree difference, but the kids know it is because they got their little heat gun and they tested the temperature on the tree furthest off the path, and they went to the center and they see a 20 degree difference. And every year we do that. So as the trees grow over the path, they see that temperature drop. It's one lesson those kids learn and that they will remember always. Trees cool down my house, my sidewalk going to school, and the planet. They know that trees do that. One lesson. Some of the other experiments we do are along pollinators, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But before we get there, I do want to say that our Youth Tree Team program, this is a place that they do most of their work. And they get to do all those types of work in one location. They get thanked by people all the time. They get to learn how to mulch, learn about how to prune, work on meadows on one project. And as I said, research is one way of educating, but there's a lot of other ways to educate. And if you remember, one of the definitions about botanical gardens, which are Arboretum are a botanical garden, one of the definitions are, a place to display, educate, and demonstrate solutions around plants and trees. And especially Arboretum, we focus our Arboretum on solutions, on urban forestry solutions. And on the top left, you can see this woven fencing. That was to save that beautiful oak tree on top. That's a scarlet oak. It is one of our biggest scarlet oaks in the entire city. And you can see how it was eroding, and that tree was going to basically fall off the hill. We completely restored that in a beautiful way. I won't tell you how much this project cost because it's kind of crazy amount of money, but it was a beautiful way, and it was a very high visible area. And we talked, educated people about erosion and how you can do something besides orange netting to catch the slope in a much more beautiful way that breaks down on its own, as opposed to can't remember the name of what you normally call it, but that orange fencing, erosion fencing, which ends up never getting removed half the time. This breaks down and it becomes compost, and you save this tree. And you have this product on the bottom called Silvacell, a place that we can put a sign up and saying, these trees are going large in this urban area because of this product. Unfortunately, the Silvacell is really expensive. It costs almost $8,000 to $10,000 a tree. We don't do a lot of it. If anybody can figure out a way to do it better and inexpensively, please give me a call. We're trying to figure that out. But this product, for those that don't understand it, it holds up the pavement. So instead of compacting the soil, you can put beautiful organic soil in. And that way the tree has more soil volume and the tree grows. But it's very expensive, so you only would save it for the most important locations that you can't grow trees. Again, if you know a better way of doing it, please call me or email me. Another way that I'll talk about how we educate is through docent tours. Steve Sanchez on the top picture here is educating people about the importance of oaks. Well, David Landis on the bottom picture is looking at his installation, his art installation. So, and I know I'm talking fast, that's typically what I do, but there are 32 native oaks to Georgia. And for those that are big bug people and have heard Doug Ptolemy speak, oak trees feed over 500 species of caterpillars. So now we have this art display that we can use to display the oak trees, that we can use as a sign and messaging that it feeds 500 caterpillars. And what are caterpillars important for? They're important for feeding baby birds. 90% of fledgling birds' diet are caterpillars. So there's a lot of stories to tell with this one art installation. And he, by the way, we way underpaid him. I feel guilty every time I see it. But he did a beautiful job. And each of those leaves represent one of our native oak trees, and they are actually to scale to each other. The biggest one's about 5 feet, but they all scale up and down to the actual size of the leaf. And we have about 29 of the actual native oak trees on that slope. This last picture to the right is just something that that we call, and now the name is, of course, escaping me, but basically it's the process of solarization, where you're creating a greenhouse and you're exhausting the seed bank, because the seeds, they sprout, the heat bakes them, they die, they sprout, the heat bakes them, they die. You do this after a few weeks, and you reduce the amount of herbicide you need, and it also reduce the amount of people going up and down that slope. So you're exhausting the seed bank so you can replant it and not have the competition of exotic seeds in your plantings. So real quickly, I'm just going to go over why it's important to get all your programs onto an infrastructure project. It's for growth. And it's not growth for growth's sake. It's growth because there's too much need out there. We have to do more. We have to do more as individuals. We have to do more as corporations and as nonprofit organizations. So Connie and I said we're going to grow because too much is happening in the environment, and we have to. And just to get a sense of being part of this project, started in 2005. But in 2011, we had about a budget of 1.7, and now we're at $4.8 million budget. That's expanding programs. Our 80% of our budget or more goes towards programs. We had 1,000 visitors doing tours on the Beltline in 1 year. We had 1,100 corporate hours on the Beltline in 1 year. Again, the Beltline itself, beyond our 4,000 volunteer hours, or somewhat included, we had 1.7 million visitors seeing the work that we're doing and seeing the education, signage, and learning a little bit more about the needs in our ecosystems, in our urban forests, in the ecology, in our environment. We capture that audience. So you've got to grow, and so just move that needle. Again, remember, we had a volunteer that managed our volunteer program for 4 years before we actually had a paid staff person. Start small, but see the vision of doing more. Just to get a sense of what we're doing right now, we're in the middle of a capital campaign to build a new facility, a 20,000 square foot facility, to move all of our programs into one facility. We have 3 facilities right now, or one in education, one in operation, and one in program and administration. We're going to bring everyone together. We have a 3-acre site. It's on the Beltline, an opportunity to bring people to the mission every single day. It's going to be a facility for community to come to and visit or just hang out. And this is also modeled off of Milwaukee Urban Ecology Center, some more of the work that we're going to do. Again, a benchmarking trip that we brought some of the lessons learned and brought it to our organization so we don't have to spend so much time in development. Just a little bit more in my last 5 minutes. I hope I give you a chance for some questions and answers. But you can't do this alone. Growth doesn't happen by yourself, and change doesn't happen by yourself. We are known as partners. We collaborate. We do as much as we can to help each other. Connie and I are partners in leading the organization, and we model that through our partnerships with other nonprofits. A couple of examples: Atlanta Audubon. We partner with them regularly on improving habitats, and they also bring wildlife programs, education programs to our organization. The Conservation Fund, we've worked very closely with in finding forested areas that we believe need preservation. Conservation Fund and Trees Atlanta, along with a number of these groups here today, changed our tree ordinance so that recompense funds can be used to buy forested land. Recompense funds are funds that money goes into if you can't plant enough trees on your development. We put money into recompense funds as part of the tree ordinance. So before, it could only go to tree management and tree planting and education. We added that it can go into forest restoration. With our help and with working with key partners, we just saved 220 acres that was going to be developed in the southwest Atlanta. So planning for growth as an organization, we have some other things we're working on. I could talk for another hour, and I know we don't have much more time, but we are doing advocacy and education around the tree ordinance. We're trying to modify and make it a better tree ordinance to save more trees. We've worked together and with other organizations to recently pass GOSA, which was another opportunity to bring funds. It's a state opportunity to bring funds to buy forested land. And then, of course, there's so many other ways that we are growing, but one new opportunity that we're working on is our 1 Million Trees campaign. In that 1 Million Trees campaign, we're doing it differently than some of the other tree organizations. We are not only looking at trees we plant, but we're looking at forests that get saved. So we're looking at, if you save that 200 acres and it's 60,000 trees, it becomes part of that million trees. So we're not only wanting to plant, but we're wanting to save. And we have already 10 partnering cities in this 1 Million Tree campaign. So lastly, I just want to say that perseverance is super important. We need to reach more people to push the needle, is what I'm trying to say. So whatever you want to do to grow and do more, do it. If you're an individual, find an organization that you can help grow their programs. Find an infrastructure project that's already, it's in the works, and see how you can make it better and win them over to convince them that you can make it a better project from an ecological standpoint. Build more programs if you're a tree organization, bring more people to your mission, and we will make the world a better place, and you can be part of that. So I just want to thank you for spending an hour with me, and I hope you learned something. And if I can help in any way and benchmarking how y'all can do things differently, Connie and I are happy to help. And if it's not us, we have a lot of great staff, because you can't do it without your great staff, who can also help you in some of your programming.
Well, thank you, Greg. That was fantastic, and so impressive what you guys are doing down there, and the partnerships you've put together, and the work you've done. It's very inspiring indeed. We would like to open up. We have 2 or 3 minutes for questions. I know we do have one on the docket. Would like to know more about the tree keeper certificate. Sounds like a great idea.
Great. So please send me an email message, and we can give you all the details. We'll give you the program, every piece of it if you want. But basically it's seven classes, and they're 3-hour classes. We are now starting to do them virtually and some in person. And we've actually learned that we think we should do it both ways and not necessarily do it all in person from just this experience with COVID. But it's 7 classes, and you basically graduate by doing, I think it's 30 volunteer hours, 24 volunteer hours, I'm being corrected. And it's a class, I'm going to tell you generally what they are. It is a tree, it's how to correctly plant trees, how to identify trees, pruning, disease identification, and these are the basic levels, community engagement, and there's a couple more that I'm forgetting, but each class represents one of those. And we usually do it, one staff person guides everybody through the certification program, but we usually have guest experts that come in. Sometimes they're staff, and sometimes they're arborists from the community. It's been super successful. It's one of our longest education programs that we have.
Very cool. We don't, one more question just popped up for the 1 minute we have. Any idea on how many of your teen work program students go on to find careers in the landscape or horticulture industry?
So you can imagine, the program is 5 years, only 5 years old, but I will give you one data point. I might get it wrong by 20%. In the beginning, we asked in the first year how many kids want to go into the green industry. We had like 1 or 2 kids out of the first 12. And last year they asked that, and I believe it was 60%. 60% said they wanted to go into the green industry. That's huge. I mean, up from 1 kid, 10% to 6, and having 32 kids saying that 60% of them wanted to go into it is fantastic. But even if they don't go into the green industry, they're going to have more respect for it, and they're going to talk more positively in their community about it. And if you're having youth come from all sectors of Atlanta, then that message is going to all sectors of Atlanta as well.
It's just fantastic. Thank you again, Greg. Really appreciate that and that wonderful keynote talk. We'll ask you to stop sharing your screen, and
All
we'll
right,
go.
I'll do my best. Thank you.
We'll go to break, and we'll come back at 10:20 with Teresa Colley. Well, welcome back. Again, thank you to Greg for that great first talk, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Teresa Colley. Dr. Colley is the head of the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Cincinnati. She joined UC in 2002 as an assistant professor, and while there, she became fascinated with invasive species, especially understanding why the common ornamental tree known as Callery pear would suddenly start to spread from cultivation after so many decades of behaving in residential and commercial landscapes. Teresa's work with invasive plants also led to her involvement with the Ohio Invasive Plant Council, for which she served as president, and helped to develop their scientifically based assessment process, working with both land managers and the nursery industry. She currently chairs the OIPC's invasive plant assessment team. I am very pleased to introduce to you the wonderful, the dynamic, the friendly, just can't say enough about Teresa Colley. I love her to death. Here she is.
Thanks, Scott. You have me at laughing. It would be wonderful to all be in the same space, right? So we could actually talk and interact. So we'll just have to make do with Zoom. So thank you very much for that introduction. What I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about the Callery pear. So those of you who have heard me talk before, it'll sound a little repetitious, but bear with me. The last half of the talk is going to be focusing on management and control of this particular beautiful but bad tree, as you'll see. So the question that we have is, how do we prevent this beautiful tree, this very popular ornamental tree that's planted along the roadways? This is an area right near where I live, actually around the corner in Westchester. So we want to know, how do we prevent this type of tree, known as the Callery pear, Pyrus calleriana, from becoming and creating this type of scenario where you have this huge swaths of invasive wild populations. If you've ever been in these things, many of them are thorny, they're thickets. It's very difficult to get through them. It's very difficult to eradicate them at this point when they get to this area. If you're curious, this is in Butler County, a site right off of the 75 freeway north of Westchester. So the spread of the calorie pair is not new. It has been happening for a while. Here's one of the latest ED maps, and you can see the counties where the species is present. The one thing that we've been finding out and we've been watching over the last decade or more is that the pair is actually spreading northward and westward. And so you start to see locations popping up in the west. In case you're curious, those asterisks over there in the eastern part of the US, those are new states that have not yet hit on ED maps. And so there's a publication coming out where they've documented the pair in those states. So one thing I do want to emphasize here is presently the northward distribution, the migration, if you will, of the species is limited by the cold tolerance. And that's going to become important later on when we talk more. So the way that I framed the talk here today is in 3 areas. And this is when Chris asked me to talk, he said, hey, I want to you to know or to talk about how it got here, you know, why is it spreading? And then most importantly, how it can be managed or controlled. So that's how it's going to be structured. So let's first talk about how it got here. And the calorie pair, as hopefully you already know, is obviously not from North America, is originally from China. This picture over here on the right is a picture of it in its native state in China. What happened was around the early 1900s, there were large acres and acres of Pyrus communis. That's the edible pear that we're used to eating, the Bartlett or those types of things. And in the Western states, there was huge, crops of the edible pear, Pyrus communis, and those are being dramatically hit by this fire blight, this bacterial infection, which was killing them. And so these are some really, I love history. So these are some really interesting pictures from Oregon in 1918. You could see the pear trees and they're collecting them. It was, again, a big, huge endeavor. They would ship these pears all over the United States and go to stores. And so here's what the fire blight would do. Essentially, again, it's a bacterial infection that would target the tips of the branches typically, and you get a very typical crooked, shepherd's crook is what they call it. What would happen is eventually it would become so severe, it would damage and kill the trees. So this is when the USDA stepped in. They said, okay, we need to find some other plant species that hopefully is naturally resistant to fire blight, and then we can bring it over, we can cross it with Pyrus communis, and see if that would work. And so the USDA actually spent lots of money sending plant explorers over to China, where many of the Pyrus species are native to. And this is the plant explorer Frank Meyer. This is a great picture of him. But he would just travel all over China, collect seeds of the species and other species as well, and ship them back to the United States. And he was mesmerized with this plant. So he says, this is a quote directly from him. We have all of his writings. We have these beautiful photographs that he took and he would ship back to the United States. So it's very clear he just was so enamored with this species. So he says, it's simply a marvel. One finds it growing under all sorts of conditions. So now as an ecologist, I'm going, whoop, red flag, right? One time on these dry, sterile mountain slopes, then again with its roots in standing water at the edge of a pond, sometimes an open pine forest, then again among scrub on blue stone ledges in the burning sun. So he's saying that this thing can grow anywhere. It's wonderful. It's, we have to do more with it. So these seeds then were sent back to the United States. Many of them were planted in Glendale, Maryland, and then also over in Oregon. But what they would do is just plant all the seeds in the ground, and they would let those, seedlings and saplings grow, and then they would test those for fire blight. And they did start to use those for breeding with Pyrus communis, and they got some fire blight resistant pears, which was wonderful. But what happened was at the USDA Plant Introduction Station, Glendale, Maryland, John Creech one day was walking along, and he saw one of these pears in this huge field, and he noticed it was a non-thorny selection. Didn't have any thorns like the other ones did. And he thought, you know what, that's actually, pretty, and so he kept his eye on it for a year or so. And then he decided that actually that might be a really great landscaping tree. And so he's the one who was responsible for actually taking that tree, cloning it. And what he did was that became known as the Bradford. And so this is a test planting that he had, if you will, where he would plant the tree as a street tree in the residential areas of Glendale, Maryland. People loved it. This is about 1961. They loved this tree. They wanted it. It became really popular. Everyone wanted to buy it. And so that is how we got the Bradford. So the Bradford is a calorie pear cultivar. It's a variety of Pyrus caloriana. It happens to be the most popular one. It is still sold today. You can buy this oftentimes, in any of the big box stores. Usually you can get a pretty good sized tree for $10 to $30. So that's how it came about. But it had a problem, and it's this. With a Bradford especially, there's no central leader. So what happens is after about 15 to 20 years or more, its own weight becomes a problem. So if there's a windstorm, a snowstorm, the branches start to break. Once one goes, it's pretty much gonna keep starting to break. And these are trees I took around where I live. Anytime there's a windstorm, I go running around because everyone has calorie pears planted around there, and I can take pictures. And so this is what happens. So in order to prevent that, because people love this tree, imagine you have this beautiful tree in your yard. It's the brilliant white flowers in the early spring. They smell horrible. That's a whole nother story. But say, your beloved tree then self-destructs, falls apart, you're going to want another one, and you're going to want one that won't do that. And so that's why then a lot of different types of these cultivars, cultivated varieties, were developed. Again, they're all the same species, but they're all cloned from a separate individual plant that was selected for some way, it looked. So the Aristocrat does have a central leader. Cleveland Select, for the most part, does, but White House, you can see some of these. Capital is known to be a column, so it could fit in tight places. Fari over here is a dwarf, so you could put it underneath power lines. So anyways, and Autumn Blaze is a great example where it's obviously beautiful in the autumn. So these calorie pear cultivars became extremely popular. I think in 2009, Chanticleer over here was the urban street tree of the year for the United States. So that is how the trees got here and became really, really popular in the residential areas and commercial areas, just purely because of how beautiful they are, because of their ornamental characteristics. So the question then is, why did it suddenly start spreading? And so here we get back to the cultivars again. Because the problem, and if you've heard me talk before, you know this already, the problem is the cultivars. And we have to go back to how those cultivars are produced. So remember I told you about the Bradford. It all started with that one tree, and then John Creech actually cloned it, and he made a bunch of other clones and essentially planted them out in that residential area in Glendale, Maryland. So what happens is each cultivar is a clone of that original tree, and it's a grafted individual. So what that means essentially is you take the cutting from the original tree called the scion, you cut that, you then have another plant that is usually calorie pear, you grow it up a little bit, and then you cut off its top, and you're going to put those two together. So you're going to have the scion and the rootstock, and there's an art to this, right? You can't just smash them together. You have to align the vascular bundles, you wrap it up, and if you're fortunate enough, they're going to grow together. So what this ends up being is that each tree that you buy at the store, like a Bradford or a Cleveland Select, you can actually look at your tree and look down it, and usually there's an inflated little area towards the base, and that would be the graft point. So the top of your tree if you have a Bradford, the top of your Bradford is exactly genetically identical to the top of your neighbor's Bradford. And then the top of that Bradford then might be, well, it's going to be different from the rootstock. That is going to become really important in a moment. So the scion and the rootstock are not genetically identical, but the scions, the top part of all of the same cultivar, say Bradford, the top parts are all genetically identical. Now the rootstock becomes important because if left unattended, and here's a tree near where I live, and you can see here that the rootstock has actually, what's probably happened is they've nicked it in mowing, and so it started to sprout. And so again, it's a problem. These are not saplings or seedlings, it's actually from the rootstock. Now over here, this is a great example on the left of a tree. I was driving along and I saw this really weird Callery pear flowering in early spring, when you can notice them. And I thought that looks a little bit strange. So of course I had to stop and get out and look. And in the middle of it is this. So you can actually see this was an original trunk of probably a planted ornamental tree that for whatever reason was cut. And then the rootstock actually grew up and became essentially a tree bush. Okay. The other part of this that's important to think about is the fact that the Callery pear, like many other members of the Rosaceae, think a lot of fruit trees, they're self-incompatible. So if you think of some fruit trees, they tell you, you can't just buy one, you have to have a pollen donor because they have to cross-pollinate. So the same is true with the Callery pear. So if you just have an individual tree all on its own, it cannot produce any fruits. It can't self-pollinate. You have to have a different individual, a different genotype, totally genetically different individual to cross. So initially in the 60s, when everyone wanted the Bradford, there were no fruits, I would say rarely, if ever. And that makes sense. They're all the Bradford, right? So all the top parts of the tree, I already told you, are all genetically the same. It comes from the mama Bradford from Glendale, Maryland. So what happened was, as those Bradfords initially then started cracking and people wanted different cultivars, then when we ask where do wild populations of Callery pear come from, again, it comes from the cultivars, because now those cultivars are genetically different from each other. They can cross-pollinate. Now, this wasn't something that scientists knew back in the early, 2000s. What happened was I heard about this from someone who heard about it from gardeners on the internet. And they said, you know what? In Maryland, they're starting to notice that this Callery pear that people plant in their yards, suddenly it's showing up along the roadsides. This is the strangest thing. And the gardeners in the area on these gardening forums online were talking about, you know what? I think it's because these cultivars are probably cross-pollinating. And so my lab, we said, this is really cool. I love curious, odd things. And we wanted to find out, well, is that true? And so that's what we did. So first of all, we started just hand pollinating the trees. So I started, this is just an example. I had a Bradford here as the mom, the maternal parent, and that Bradford I emasculated. I pulled off all the male parts of the flower to make sure it couldn't self-pollinate. And then I brought in pollen from other flowers on the same plant, so self-pollen, a different tree, another Bradford, I pulled pollen off of that. And then I grabbed pollen from different cultivars that I had handy, and then also pollen from other wild populations. So as you would expect, if this is truly a self-incompatible species, there was 0% fruit set with self-pollen, 0 with another Bradford. That makes perfect sense. But lo and behold, as you can see, if you suddenly use pollen from a different cultivar, Chanticleer Red Spire, you have 100% fruit set. If you use pollen from 2 different wild populations, it's close to 100. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But essentially it becomes, because some of those wild populations are hybrids, are half Bradford is the reason there. So anyway, so that was interesting. So then we wanted to test that genetically because we can do all these really cool things in the lab. And this actually, I have to honestly tell you, it's fun. It's like a puzzle. You're trying to solve this, right? So what we do is we go to the wild trees, and then we also went to trees in nurseries that were labeled, and you can just grab a leaf and bring it back to the lab. You grind it up, put in some different chemicals in there, and you can extract out the DNA. And this is what it looks like in this lower tube. Essentially, it looks just like snot, and that's crude, but that's what it looks like. And then you could put certain types of markers in there, DNA fragments, to amplify only a very specific part of the DNA. And you can use that to compare and say, hey, is this tree over here genetically identical? Is it the same thing as this tree over here? Or maybe it's different. So really fun stuff that you can do in the lab. And I really like this. If you guys have heard me talk before, you've probably seen this graph, but I do really like it. This is the output that we have from a program called Structure. And here, let me just explain to you, each column is a separate tree that we grabbed the leaf off of. The label below is what that tree was being sold as. So these are data where I actually went to different big box stores and different places, nurseries, and I asked them if I could take a leaf off their plant. They usually thought I was crazy. But then we brought it back to the lab, ground it up, and we looked to see if they're similar or not. So what this program does is it clusters all these samples if they're similar and gives them the same color. So here you can see, first of all, that all the different samples that I had of aristocrat trees all came out genetically identical. They're all yellow. Now, if we go to Bradford, here's a bunch of trees that I collected that were being sold as Bradford. And you can see that most of them are coming out as this blue. They're all similar, but lo and behold, you'll notice we have 3 trees that were being sold as Bradford that are genetically identical and therefore are aristocrat. And then we have 1 tree, again, being sold as a Bradford that actually is really a red spire cultivar. And you can sort of see across how that all ends up. Capital, of course, was like 100% capital. So essentially, first thing is individuals within a cultivar, like aristocrat and capital, are genetically identical. So yes, they're clones. We're able to verify that. But what I was just pointing out is in the case of the Bradford, cultivars are sometimes sold mislabeled. So 11 to 12% of the trees were being sold as mislabeled. And when I talk with my nursery colleagues, I say, oh yeah, that could easily happen, during the whole process of growing and shipping, tags could be dropped and, switched. But the other thing here you'll notice, hopefully this already caught your eye, is that for several of them, Chanticleer, we had a whole bunch of samples of Cleveland Select, Stonehill, a relatively new one, and Fari, that little dwarf, they came out as totally genetically identical. And initially this stumped us. We thought we had done something wrong and we reran it. We got the same results and we thought maybe we still did something wrong. We reran it, we got the same results. So later on, I was talking with some of my nursery colleagues and I explained this. I said, this is weird. And they said, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. These are all cloned from the same tree in Cleveland, Ohio. Apparently there's a gorgeous tree that several different people stopped by and took a cutting, and that developed into a different cultivar. So the rule here is if you could pay a lot of money to buy a Chanticleer or a Stonehill, but it's the same exact thing as the less expensive Cleveland Select. All right. So the other really cool thing we can do is now that we've identified different cultivars, we can take that data, that information, and we can go and sample a wild population. So this is an area called the Benedict Nature Preserve that my university owns. And this is in Montgomery and Blue Ash, Ohio. So this is the 71 freeway going up here. On the outside here is the 275. And this road here is Cornell Road. For those of you who live in the area, this is Sycamore High School right there. So what we did was we sampled trees all around in the neighborhood from people's yards, and they're color coded here. You can see a lot of them are green, meaning a lot of them are Bradfords. And then we sampled a lot of trees that are in the preserve, and you can see that vast majority are hybrids, and they're actually hybrids between Bradford and Aristocrat. If for those of you in the area, you might remember, you might be wondering, why does this look different? This is in 1999. There was that big tornado that came through this area and swept through and downed a bunch of trees. So there's been a major disturbance leading to the invasion of these wild pears. So what happens here is that the crossing among cultivars is important, but what we also started to think about, and remember how I told you about how those cultivated trees, so if you buy a tree from a nursery, it's really a grafted individual. So remember, we have the top and the bottom. We started to think, okay, well, wait a minute. Well, we know that the different cultivars are crossing. Is it possible for the upper part of a tree, to the scion, to cross with the rootstock to have fruit production? And it turned out that the answer is yes. we went to 57 different trees, most in my neighborhood, but around the university. We genotyped both the top and the bottom and compared them. In all cases, the top part, the scion, was genetically different from the rootstock. That wasn't really surprising. There's also interesting things where it turns out that we found out the rootstock is cloned too. So in some cases, there's the same genotype of the rootstock in different locations. Anyways, This suggested that it wasn't just the cultivar, but now an actual individual tree, if left alone and unattended or not attended properly and allowed for the rootstock to sprout, that it can possibly now cross with itself to produce the fruits. We took that information, we went back to those original populations of wild plants, and we checked that out, and it turned out that yes, some of the trees in the wild populations were F1 hybrids between a cultivar and rootstock. So that does happen. So essentially what it comes down to with the calorie pair, the formation of the wild populations comes about because you have these different cultivars that are now, the bees, everything loves them. I haven't told you that, but they smell horribly, but insects love them. They're going to cross all over the place. And then they're going to produce fruits. Those are going to be carried off by starlings. And then those go, the starlings fly off and essentially defecate them everywhere. And then that's not the whole story. Remember, I told you about how the scion could cross with the rootstock and those get out too. So essentially, wild populations originate from crossing between genetically distinct cultivars, often in people's yards, and then also between the scion and the rootstock of a single tree. So this is why, if you drive around the roads, and especially now, I think probably next week is my prediction, that the pear trees are going to suddenly start opening. I've been noticing, at least where I live, the blooms are getting, or the buds are getting really nice and big. So essentially that's how now we get these wild pears popping up along the roadsides. Notice, oftentimes they're around electrical lines and telephone lines where those wonderful European starlings, themselves the introduced species, are going to be perching and defecating out seeds. So I had always assumed that wild pears are always on the edges of forests, along the roads, and we actually had to question that within the last few years, because wild calorie pears, I started to get reports of them being in forest interiors. And this is an example. I think this one, if I remember correctly, is in Indiana. This used to be a former pear nursery site, and you can see what it looks like today. So these are actually, just to give you a reference, these are very tall, head high saplings of the calorie pear. So then we wanted to know, well, that's weird. Why is that happening? And I asked, okay, well, maybe there's a certain type of hybrid. Maybe, there's some special, I don't know, aristocrat times red spire. Maybe that's that hybrid, which happens to be really good at living under low light conditions and can really persist in the forest. So that was our wonderful idea. And so I went out with some of my students, one, Sapora Sorota, and we actually went and we found all these little saplings and seedlings. We, pulled off the leaf like we did before, got its DNA, looked at it, and guess what? The answer is no, it's not a certain type of hybrid. It's really anything and everything is out there. So a lot of these things that you see deep in the forest, it is not a single hybrid. It's a mix of different genotypes. So then we thought, well, okay, that's an answer, I guess, but it was not very satisfying. And a few years ago, I was given a talk, and I was approached later by an ornithologist, Julie Craves, and she said, you know what, I think I have an answer to your, what you're talking about. And I said, what? And she says, it's all about bird behavior. And I said, tell me more. And she said, well, the European starlings, it's true, will go after those seeds, later in the season. They don't like them first off. Apparently the European starlings don't like to eat the fruits, but they'll wait until it's the last thing left and then they'll eat them. And yeah, they do have that behavior where they hang out on the edges. But what she had been studying is the American robin. And she had been noticing that the American robin is now eating the calorie pear fruits. And she suggested that they have a different behavior. So they normally don't, go in huge masses and flocks. Sometimes they do, they are in flocks, like in the spring right now. Sometimes I get a bunch in my yard, but usually what they do, they have a behavior where they'll go and grab something to eat, fly back into the forest, perch somewhere, eat it, fly back out, grab something else, fly back into the forest, perch and eat it. So her suggestion was it was actually the bird behavior that had been having this other effect on the behavior of this calorie pear tree, which I thought was really interesting. So the other question we can ask, and this is really important because now we're starting to think more about the management end, is how readily can wild pear seeds and seedlings establish? And more importantly, how often will they persist in the wild after you remove those trees, right? So after you remove an invasive tree population. And so what we did was we wanted to look at the seeds. And so these are the fruits after they've been hanging on the trees in late winter. And just so you know, they're very tough. You actually have to get vice grips to crack them open to extract the seeds. These are what the seeds look like. And then we did germination studies to see how well they germinated. And as they germinated, then we took them and we put them into potted soil, and we saw and measured how well the seedlings then grew. So originally, this is what we did back in 2006. We collected seeds from cultivated and wild trees from a bunch of sites. So all the cultivated trees, because I told you that the two cultivars have to cross in order to produce fruit. So we know all those are F1 hybrids between two cultivars. The wild trees, what we call our advanced hybrids. So the wild tree itself is probably a hybrid, and it might be crossing back with a cultivar in the area or maybe another wild tree. So it gets a little complicated. But essentially, this is what we had this is percent seed viability, according to all the different cultivars. Just as one snippet of the data that we had. But the point I want to show you is that it's all pretty high, above 60% for a lot of them. Capital actually was nearly to 80%. And then the other thing you'll see is a lot of these, Chanticleer, Cleveland Select, Fari, and Stonehill, were all about the same. And that's what that C indicates. Statistically, they're all the same. And this makes sense. Remember, I told you those are all essentially the same genotype. It's the same tree. So that was sort of cool to see. So back in 2006, we saw there was no significant differences in germination among the cultivars, and it was high, 81%, and seedling survival was even higher, 91%. So that's back in 2006. Honestly, what happened was we had the seeds, I put them in the refrigerator, and we forgot about them for a number of years. And so 11 years later, we decided, hey, let's take these out and let's see if they're even more, viable. And I thought, nah, they're not going to be. And so we did the same exact thing. We cracked open the fruits, took out the seeds, put them in little Petri dishes. And these are the data here. So the first thing I want you to see, so on the top here, we have percent seed germination and then percent seedling survival. And I've just shown you 3 cultivars. So Aristocrat, Bradford in the middle, and Cleveland Select. The light gray bar is the data from 2006, and then 11 years later is the 2017 data. So the first thing is you could see that for both seed germination and seedling survival, it tended to decline over time. There's a weird case of Bradford actually went up. There are just a few seeds, so that might have just been a really happy tree. And so that's one thing that we found. The other thing is there was some decline, but the germination is still, 50% to, over 80%. So it's still pretty darn high. So here for Aristocrat, you can see the actual numbers. So pretty impressive. And I would argue too that the percent seedling survival has gone down, but is still pretty substantial. So this suggests that wild populations have a seed bank, and we're going to have to keep controlling these. So unfortunately, for those of you who are looking at invasive or wild pear populations on your properties, the unfortunate part is this means even after you remove those trees, you're probably still going to have seeds sprouting and seedlings popping up. If nothing else, is done to the site, you're going to have that happening for probably quite a few years to come. Now, the one thing I need to mention is that this was done in the lab, right? So this wasn't done in the field. So these numbers might be a little lower in the field because you're going to have, like natural seed predation over time and things like that. But it still does suggest that under the best of circumstances, the calorie pear seeds are able to do rather well, right? Okay, so that's why it's spreading. In our rest of the time here, I wanted to focus a little bit more on how it can be managed. So let's talk about that. So first of all, before we talk about practical mechanical ways that you and I would be trying to get some invasive species out of our natural areas, let's talk about whether there's any natural controls, because heck, that would be great if something were able to control it and we didn't have to do anything. So I always used to say no. But if you remember, what was this? This was in, trying to think, last year, the year before, 2020, June 2020. there was all on the news, all this information about, what's this strange, I love this, what's this strange orange dust? Even Inside Edition nationally was like, the mystery of the orange dust falling from pear trees in Ohio has been solved. And this one, of course, is great. This is Cincinnati.com. No, it's not Cheeto dust. Streets of Sharonville painted orange by pear tree fungus. The mystery solved. And so, this was hitting a lot of the airwaves, about what was going on. And so these are pictures courtesy of Joe Boggs. If any of you know him from OSU Extension, he's great. And so what this was not some special thing from outer space. It was essentially the spores of the cedar quince rust fungus. This is a native fungus in our area. And so it infected these pear trees. And so it led to all of this falling on the ground. Now, this particular fungus normally infects the eastern red cedar. And so this is what it would look like on the cedar itself. But of course, for us, it manifested itself on the pear fruits, you can see. And sometimes it was a little bit on the leaves, but honestly, I just saw it on the pear fruits. So one of my undergrads, we saw this and we got all excited and we said, let's do a project and let's, compare the effect, what is this doing to the fruits? Because maybe it will have fewer seeds or something like that. So she started a project and started collecting monitoring all the fruits that were infected and those that weren't. And essentially the project we had to stop because what we found out was that every fruit that was infected died. Here's another example here that this particular fungus can attack related species. This is in my backyard. I have a serviceberry, and this is what it looks like. And one day I was walking past it, and I realized, oh my gosh, what is all these little things? And I looked closer, and the cedar quince fungus had actually attacked the serviceberry. Now it makes sense because they're in the same plant family. So again, what I already sort of gave it away, but we wanted to ask, will the fungus reduce fruit reproduction for the year of the Callery pear trees? Again, a tree in my neighbor's yard. And, we thought that makes sense because you start to look around and, this thing was really attacking. It was heavy in particular areas of the city. And so here's pictures. And so I go walking a lot in my neighborhood, and especially now that I have a dog. And so I take pictures of the neighborhood, especially when there's Callery pear trees. So this is in 2018, before we had the cedar rust fungus, the quince rust fungus. And these are just pictures of fruits, nice and plump towards the end of fall. And then you could sort of see they start falling all over, and it's a hassle when you're starting to walk through, right? But by 2020, this is sort of anecdotal, you could see there's hardly any fruits at all because a large number of them, as they matured, they would be attacked by this fungus and they would literally just shrivel up. So here's another close up here. Maybe one or two might get through, but this is essentially what we're looking at, these shriveled up fruits. So I'm really curious to see what happens this spring and to see if this keeps continuing or whether it just sort of dies back over time. But you can see that these trees, at least in areas where this rust occurred, took a pretty big hit to the reproductive output. So now let's get back to how can we physically manage the Callery pear? If we can't depend upon the rust, what else can we do? So here's a few steps, and some of them make perfect sense, right? So the first thing, of course, is to remove the wild trees individually if you can. And this is years ago work that I was doing at Miami Whitewater at the Shaker Trace wetlands. We were seeing all of these little tiny Callery pears. I shouldn't say tiny. They were like waist high, breast high. We're seeing a lot of them in the restored prairie there, and we were trying to figure out where they came from. And finally we found this really big tree with lots of fruits. And so we said, that's probably the mama tree. She has got to go. So we went ahead with permission, of course, from the park. I need to clarify that. And we cut down that tree. And then it's really important, just like honeysuckle, if you've done the honeysuckle poles, it's really important to spray that stump. And we just use glyphosate, Roundup. And I've used it just, the store-bought version too. That works as well, but like a 5% will do. And then other people have told me that they've had a lot of success with Pentrabark, combining that, using that to penetrate the bark. So you actually don't have to necessarily go and cut the whole tree down. I do want to note that spraying the entire plant with herbicide, although that would be great, especially if you have those huge swaths of calorie pear, spraying the entire plant is not effective. And the reason is this plant is good at what it does. Remember I told you how Frank Meyer had, was all enthused about this species back in China and sent back all those pictures. It can grow anywhere. It can also re-sprout anywhere. So essentially, if you spray it with herbicide, it can just quickly root sprout here. You can sort of see this is at the Shaker Trace wetlands a few years ago before they really got a good handle on it. So there's other things, other different chemicals that other people suggest. And so I'm hoping we'll have time. And so some of you, if you want to learn how best to eradicate the plant, and if you're thinking about using herbicides, then maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation about that. So Triplicur is one that other people have suggested using, especially if they're newly established trees. So you have an invasive population that's just getting started. So the interesting thing though, is if you don't use herbicide, if you say, I don't like herbicides, I mean, I personally don't like herbicides, but there are cases where if you want to be really effective, you've got to use them. And so in this case, what I tell people is if you don't use a herbicide, you just cut it. You'll notice all these little shoots coming up from the rootstock. These are not seedlings. This is not the seeds. This is the rootstock. This is another case. Again, all of these are in my neighborhood where, you cut it, and this is what I call, you just make the plant mad. And so it starts sprouting like crazy. This is a great one. They cut it, and then you could see all the rootstocks. Actually, you could follow the roots. Sometimes the roots are sort of shallow, and so it's all on the surface of the soil, just right maybe underneath the grass. And so you could actually follow the whole thing, and the whole plant was trying to sprout back. The other thing too is even if you have individual seedlings, they're really hard to remove if you've ever tried to do this. So on the left is, again, I'm on one of my walks in my neighborhood. Someone, they saw it growing. They thought, hey, I don't know what this is. This is actually pretty cool. And they let it grow. Obviously, you can see they carefully weeded around it. About a month or two later, then it disappeared. So they must have figured out what it was, and they didn't really want it. But over to the right, here's an example of a seedling that I grabbed from our Benedict Preserve back in November. This is, I should put something on scale here, but the top part here above this bar that I just drew is probably about 4 inches, and you could see the whole rest of the root system. So really, even at this stage, it's really difficult to yank those out, especially if you have clay soil. Really, even at that stage, you're gonna have to cut it and apply some herbicide. If you don't put the herbicide, it's just going to come back up and sprout into 2 or 3, and you're going to get more of the bush. So that's step number 1, targeting those individual trees. Another thing that you could do is to treat entire areas. So say, you have a restored prairie, and suddenly the pear starts showing up. This is a typical story. So you want to do something to prevent the spread. So one approach that people have tried is to mow or bush hog or bushwhack, whatever you want to call it, right? To go through and to try to get them down. But of course, mowing makes them mad is my motto, and they just come back again, right? You're going to get, instead of one sprout, you're going to get a whole bunch of shoots coming off. So you get little bushes instead of little tall saplings. Now, another idea that some people had was using fire. And there was a really great paper that came out just a few years ago by Works and Marshall. And that's what they studied, essentially. They had different treatments where they used fire and not. What they found out was that when you do a low-grade fire, a typical one you would do, right, for a prairie restoration, say, they found that the fire did top kill all the established plants. So that was great. But, and this is where I sort of come back to the pear gets mad, is that most plants responded with 3 to 4 epicormic sprouts. So in other words, shoots, right? They also found out that 2-year-old seedlings also sprouted. However, the 1-year-old seedlings were usually killed, as were any exposed seeds or fruits on the surface. And that makes sense because they were burned, right? So as far as I know, there was no study of seeds in the soil. So I'd be wanting to know, how does that affect the soil seed bank? But the point of this paper was that fire can be really effective, but you still have to combine it with herbicide, especially if you're going to then, after you do the fire, you're going to have a bunch of the older plants sprout back as bushes. You're going to have to attack them again with another area of herbicide. All right. So another thing is, what if you have, and I get this question a lot, someone who has a pear tree in their yard, they love this pear tree, right? It's beautiful, it's big, those nice showy white flowers in the spring. They really want to keep their pear tree. They do not want to cut down the pear tree. So I say, well, you can keep it, but even, I get this from people who are really sensitive. They want to help the environment. They want to be, they realize that the pear is bad. So what can they do? Well, you can actually spray it with this chemical, Ethifon. And this is something that when I was younger, my parents apparently sprayed our olive tree. We had a big olive tree on the corner. And I remember my dad, if he didn't spray at the right time, then we would have these huge olives all dropping all over the place, which everyone thought was messy. So this spray is 95% effective in preventing fruit set. And the cool thing is it doesn't prevent premature blossom drop, but you have to get it. You have to have someone or yourself spray it. And you probably have to have a license, I would imagine, to do so. But then the other thing too is that you have to do it right at the right time, because if you're too late or too early, you're not going to hit it when you need to, and then you might still have fruits develop. Okay, another one is, this is another obvious one. We just need to eliminate planting cultivars, any cultivars, especially near natural areas or disturbed sites. So this is really important. This is an area in Westchester where I live, and this is a homeowners association I'll talk about in just a moment. But you can see these wild pears popping up in the areas, and then you can see the nice planted pears in the neighborhood, but you can look right outside of it and you see all the wild pears starting to spread out. Now, I've talked with other people too, and I can sort of see the point. Some people say, well, if you're in a really densely urban area, maybe it's okay to plant pears along the roadways because they're not going to be able to get anywhere else. And heck, the pear is a really good tolerant tree, and not a lot of things can actually live in this horrible environment, between pavement, and the trees might be able to. So that's an argument that I've heard. But I would say that most of all, if you're near a natural area, just don't even put the pear. And it's not even if you're just adjoining the pear, that area with the pear. Remember that these are carried by birds. So then you have to think about, well, how far would a bird naturally travel to defecate those seeds? And so you don't want to be planting the pears within any of that area. So what else can you do if someone really likes that pear tree and say they're like, okay, I'll give it up, but I want something that looks like it. So this is where it's really important for the nursery industry to come in, and we need to work with them and with horticulturists to come up with suitable alternatives. So again, it's going to depend upon what the client, the consumer, the gardener really wants, right? So if they're looking for that nice, bright spring bloom, these are some possibilities that you can suggest. The French tree, by the way, was one that we had been suggesting, and then Don Cipollini did some work and found out that it actually is susceptible to the emerald ash borer. And then we're like, oh, shoot, well, that's going to get rid of that. Recently, though, he found out, and I was just looking at this, that apparently some of the French trees can actually, after they're infected, they can actually recover. So it doesn't appear to kill them off so much to the extent that it's doing for the ash trees in the area. But anyways, these are some suggestions. You might think of other alternatives. Say maybe the point of someone really wanting a tree, an alternative is not the flowers. Maybe it's more the shape, the little, what I call the lollipop, or maybe it's the tolerance, and so you might come up with other alternatives as well. So another way is to develop sterile cultivars. And so this is an idea that had been out there for a while. But Tom Rainey at North Carolina State had been working on this for, a number of years. And recently, the Chastity pear, so you got to love that name, was developed and commercially released. So this came out about 2018. This is a cross. It's actually an interspecific cross. So it's a cross between a female Caloriana that he manipulated. Normally they're diploid, and he was able to get a tetraploid. and cross that with a male diploid Pyrus siliciafolia, known as silver ball, not bell, but ball. And then this has been patented. And I got a question recently, and someone said, well, what about this new cultivar NCPX2? And it turns out it's the same as the chastity. So these individuals are all triploid, meaning it's going to be harder for them, well, theoretically impossible for them to cross. But as you know, nature always finds a way. And so when we test this species, they're mostly sterile pollen, which is good, mostly, and sterile ovules. In fact, when you go to the patent information, which is what I do, it talks about how seed production of the chastity pear compared to a normal diploid control, the seed production was 0.86%. So about 1% of that of a normal calorie pear tree. So a few seeds are produced, but then what they said, the few seedlings that come from those seeds are abnormal chromosome numbers, so they're not going to be able to reproduce, is the idea there. So that's a possibility of a sterile cultivar. Again, you'd want to make sure it's truly sterile. And then the next question is, you want to make sure it stays sterile through the generations, as people plant it around. The next one is the regulation of commercial sale. And so up to this point, we've been talking more about how do you remove it from the wild, where should you plant it to be more responsible, environmentally responsible and conscious. So now we're getting to a little different is, let's think about, okay, if it's so bad and it's getting out there, can we stop the source? So can we regulate the commercial sale of this thing? Now, the important part is this plant, the species, Pyrus caleriana, has been listed by the Ohio Invasive Plants Council as invasive on their, what I call it, educational list since 2014. And that was something that we worked on for a long time. I was part of that conversation. We worked with the nursery industry to make sure that they felt welcome and part of the conversation so they could understand the problem. Since then, in 2018, Ohio went into invasive plant regulation. And so there's a list of plants that are regulated by the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And so it's a list of regulated invasive species that are banned from commercial sale and export from the state. I'm on a plant advisory committee to the ODA for that. So I've been involved with that as well. So in 2018, the species was listed on that, but recognizing that it has such an important economic effect in the state, it was placed under a 5-year phase out at that point. So if you do the math, and I'll do it for you, it will be illegal to sell any Pyrus caleriana cultivars in January of 2023. So that's January of 2023. So that's something, at least in the state of Ohio, that has happened. So you might ask, okay, what's happening in other states? It turns out that several other states now are looking at regulation of Pyrus caleriana, especially as it's becoming more apparent growing along the roadways. And so here's a map that I made in this sort of tannish color are those states that have Pyrus caleriana on a watch list. In orange are those states that consider it invasive. They have it on their invasive state-based lists. And in light yellow in Illinois is where it's been removed from their invasive list, or in green it's just not listed at all. So, and then there's some states, as you can see below, where they're specifically concerned with the economic impact. If we put this plant as invasive and it's not able to be sold, how will that impact our nursery industry within the state? Example here is with Indiana. One reason why it hasn't gone to orange is that there's a rule that actually does prohibit the sale and distribution of a number of different species, but both Callery pear and Norway maple were removed from that list purely because of their high economic impact. So this is honestly something that the states are just grappling with, is how do you match invasive plant impacts on the environment with the economic impacts. And so, I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had about that. So one of the last things I wanted to mention, coming down to the end here, is it's really important to consider the local ordinances and the homeowners association codes and covenances. And I never thought about this, but we're going to go back to this neighborhood in Westchester. And one of the people who lived in the area contacted me and said, hey, I just found this really weird thing in the Homeowners Association Codes and Covenants. And it's this. And I had to take this picture. This is a picture in the area. I just thought they pruned the tree. A little funny. So that's all that is. So here what they said was, in the Codes and Covenants, they have a specific clause talking about pear tree maintenance. And if you read about it, you have to keep them maintained, which makes sense. But then it says, it is the homeowner's responsibility to replace any dead pear trees with a Cleveland Select pear tree. So they're actually being so specific, they want the Cleveland Select. So we were really curious about that. And we reached out to them and talked with them to let them know that, these pear trees that are in your yards over here are actually responsible for those pear trees that are wild over down the hill. To their credit, the Homeowners Association did decide to change that clause and promote other trees. So it does work. All right, the last thing I want to leave you with before, and I think we might have some time for questions, but I'll depend upon Scott to tell me about that, is sometimes it's not so easy just to say the tree is bad, let's remove it, let's get rid of it, right? We already talked a little bit about people who might love that particular tree and they have a personal attachment to that beautiful tree in their yard. They don't want to cut it down. There's a whole nother level. And so this goes back to, if you've heard me talk about this, I just find this fascinating. So when 9/11 hit at ground zero, there was one tree that was still alive that was closest to the blast site. And this was the survivor tree. And this is a picture of it. What people did was they saw this tree, they took it as a symbol of recovery and rebirth and fighting back, right? And so they took that tree that looked, it's really decimated, right? A few leaves hanging off. They took it back and then they planted it in a garden in the Bronx. And this is what it looked like. Despite that, it still grew. So now it's been placed back at the ground zero area as a tribute. And so it's called the survivor tree. You can see it still looks sort of interesting and it's all, wrapped up because it's been so damaged, but it actually, it grew. Isn't that amazing? It grew from this few sticks back into a tree. So that's great. But the interesting thing about that is that tree is also part of a program called the Survivor Tree Seedling Program. So the idea here is that tree is not just a tree. It's not, they don't even want to think it's an invasive tree, but rather, again, I told you earlier, it's a symbol of rebirth, regrowth, being strong. And so the idea here is that they've taken fruits from this tree, extracted the seeds. Some local high schools have been growing them, and then they send them out to anyone who wants them all around the world. And so you can go and you can get some seedlings from this tree to plant out. So as an ecologist, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is horrible, right? You're sending these invasive species all over the place. But then again, this is, people have value, a different value to this. So there's this whole argument and discussion to be had, but this was all part of a recent paper. And I only knew about this because I was asked to review it. But it's actually really fascinating to think about the ecological versus social values that we place on an invasive species. So I just want to leave you with that to sort of think about. I don't know what's the right or wrong answer. Well, I know what I feel, but you might feel differently or you might feel the same. So in summary, really what I hope you've gotten out of this is that wild pears originate, from crossing between the cultivars, but also the rootstock. So we talked about how they got here. Main thing is you only need one different tree, one different genotype, and then all of them will be able to cross. We talked about how the wild pears are really good at what they do. They have that high seed viability. The seeds stay potentially in the soil for a long time. So that's something we need to think about. And then we talked about different management strategies. So the last thing is, and I don't have a good answer for this, but I always get this asked a lot is, okay, well, why care, right? Is the cat out of the bag? It's already done. There's nothing we can do. Well, remember I told you about how the northern movement is restricted by cold tolerance. Well, one of the things there's still new cultivars being produced that are cold tolerant. And so there's still, I would argue, there's still areas where the pear can grow and move into and further damage our natural areas. So I think there still is a need to pay attention to this particular species, and we can use it as an example for others. We can learn from what has happened in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to stop there and leave you with this beautiful picture from 2014 when we had flowering pear tree in the snow. And I will hand it back to Scott and see if we have any questions. I saw some.
We have a few here, and that was fantastic, by the way. Does anybody know if the city of Cincinnati and neighborhoods have any plan to remove existing calorie pear street trees? I have not heard that, and no one's jumping in, so I guess we'll proceed. Pam asks, are you saying that seedlings can sprout back from any root left?
Yeah, if you don't get the root, they could sprout back. It's all energy, you know, it's all resources and energy. If they have enough of the root, then they will sprout back. So if you have a seedling pop up in your flower bed and you just cut it off, I would say 95, 99% chance it's just going to come back.
Jack asks if Chastity could be sold in Ohio as an interspecies hybrid that is sterile.
Good question. That has not come up yet. I'm trying to think. Technically, and this gets to the hybrid issue because it's half calorie pear, it's not completely calorie pear. So if it were completely calorie pear, you know, Pyrus caloriana, it can't. So what would happen? Well, okay, so with the current regulation, what would have to do is someone, a nursery, probably from the nursery side, someone would have to request that that particular cultivar be exempted from the current listing of the species. So there is a mechanism for that. Mm-hmm. So then they would have to, it would be on someone would have to show then that that species is not invasive, but that could be done. I think that's the mechanism it would do.
Okay. Well, Teresa, we need to go to break, but there are other questions. Are you able to answer those?
Yeah.
Question and answer? That would be fantastic. We'll take 5 minutes. And again, thank you, Teresa. That was fantastic. We'll come back at 11:25.
Okay, great. And I'll work on those questions now.
Thanks, Teresa. Well, all right. It is 11:25. Welcome back to the Taking Root Great Tree Summit, our 8th year. At this point, we move on to a different segment of the program with awards and things. But first, we would like to introduce John Hawley, the Purdue University Extension Agent in Dearborn County. John, are you on?
Yes, I am. I'm having some problems getting my video started, though. Travis, can you help me out with that, maybe, if you can hear me?
We can hear you, but it's a little choppy.
I'm here. Sorry, with the video, it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, Travis, can you turn on his video?
There we go. There we go. I'm here. Sorry, guys. Well, Scott, I really appreciate that, and really appreciate the chance to honor my predecessor, who I know worked with many of you. I'm also happy to say that I think we have 1 or 2 members of Mike's family on the call. Mike Hornbeck passed away about 2 months ago now. Mike was a county extension educator here in Dearborn County for about 3 decades. I'll go ahead and read his brief remarks right here. A Boilermaker, true and true. After graduating from Purdue, Mike taught ag a few years at nearby Milan High School. And then, like I said, moved on to Purdue. Not only did he impact our local ag and natural resources programs, not only in Dearborn County, but beyond, he was also a 4-H educator at one time, and was very impactful to hundreds of Southeast Indiana youth, and really statewide. Mike retired in January of 2017 to spend time with his family. And something that I'm learning more and more about, you know, his legacy every day. He helped out with Taking Root here. And I'm really proud to hear that he worked with Travis and the team and everyone else. We're really grateful for him in Dearborn County. As his predecessor for about 4 years now, I can tell you there are still so many clients, so many partners I meet with that the conversation starts out with, hey, you know, I worked with Mike back in the day, we did this, we did that, Mike helped me with this, Mike helped me with that. And that's the great thing about Extension is it's a truly service-based career path. For now, Travis suggested this. I think it's a great idea if we just have a nice short moment of silence to honor Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, I had the pleasure to meet Mike in the early days of Taking Root and also through the GIC committee. Great guy, terrific intellect, did so much in his community, but also, you know, brought the Dearborn, Southeast Indiana community and attached it with ours here in the greater Cincinnati area, and that was so important. So thank you for that. I apologize for the poor sound quality for John, but we could hear the statement. It was important, and everybody, I'm sure, did understand it. So thank you very much, John. Along those lines, I would like everybody to have a good thought or a prayer for our friend Brad Bonham. Brad works with Joe Boggs and gang down at Extension extensively. She's an amazing intellect, researcher, scientist who has helped many, many organizations with different questions and concerns in the tri-state. And she recently suffered a very serious medical situation. She's recovering at Good Sam Hospital, and we certainly wish and hope and pray that she has a full and swift recovery. I will now introduce Pat Greason from Natorp's Nursery, and we will begin the award presentations.
Thanks, Scott. At this time, Taking Root would like to recognize individuals, organizations, and communities throughout the greater Cincinnati area for their support for Taking Root and for the tree planting causes. Starting with who do we have first? We have the John Aston Warder Award. This award is to recognize a private sector entity or individual for initiatives that address the goals of Taking Root, benefit and serve as a model for protecting and enhancing our region's trees and forests, and honors the memory of John Warder, a prominent local physician who helped to create the American Forestry Association in 1875. Travis, could you please advance to the next slide? We have two organizations for this award. We would first like to thank Marcia Lindner for her generous philanthropy throughout the greater Cincinnati area and in Northern Kentucky, for her generous support of a lot of tree campaigns, as well as the Natorp Nursery. The Natorp family has been very generous over the years in helping a lot of the forestry campaigns here throughout the Cincinnati region. Our next award is the John B. Peasley Award. This is to recognize a public sector or nonprofit entity or individual for initiatives that address the goals of Taking Root, benefit and serve as a model for protecting and enhancing our region's trees and forests, and honors the memory of John B. Peasley, the superintendent who closed Cincinnati schools on April 27th, 1882, so that students could plant trees in an abandoned vineyard that has since become the city's beautiful Eden Park. This year, Taking Root would like to recognize 3 different groups for this award, starting with Kenton County Conservation District for all of their generous programs that they have been sponsoring in the Northern Kentucky region. Next, would be Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana Regional Council of Governments, OKI. Taking Root depends on them for so much of their support and so many things that they have done with us. They have collaborated with us on so many projects and have spent so much generous time in helping us to be able to get a lot of the programs going that we are working with. And finally, the City of Wyoming. City of Wyoming has been a Tree City USA since 1994 and has been committed to doing a lot of projects for forest restoration in their community. They have an outstanding program that they have put together and are doing a really good job with their commitment towards the trees and protecting them in their community. Our next award is the Johnny Appleseed Award. This is to recognize those who have helped advance Taking Root's goals to plant trees, better manage our forests, promote the benefits of trees, and or to foster stewardship and engage people in this effort. This year, Taking Root would like to recognize John Seymour. John Seymour is a board member emeritus. He was one of the founding board members of Taking Root. He has retired from Oxbow Nature Conservancy in Dearborn County, Indiana. Our next award is the Brewster Rhodes Volunteer of the Year Award. We have two awards that we would like to give this year. One is to Jim Mason, who is a volunteer with Preserve Burnett Woods and has been doing an outstanding job up in the Burnett Woods area, trying to preserve that and keep doing a lot of invasive control and keeping that as a really nice natural area in the Cincinnati area. And we would also like to recognize Margot Lindell. Margot is another board member emeritus of Taking Root who has done a really good job for us and has generously given her time over the years to keep Taking Root on track with where it needs to go. That concludes the awards that we have for this year. We are always looking for new people and new things and new projects that are going on throughout the region. So we'd like to take this time to recognize these people for these awards.
Thank you, Pat. One of the best things about doing these great tree summits in person is being able to present these folks and celebrate their work and their passion in person and introduce them to people. And it's just a darn shame that we couldn't do that this year, but what a deserving, wonderful group of recipients. Congratulations to all of them, and thank you for everything that you're doing. We will now move on to the local tree and forest initiatives. This is about an hour segment where groups can talk about what they are working on at strict 10-minute intervals. Don't go over or make me be the bad guy, all right? Our first speaker or presenter is Bruce Kohler. He will talk about the Mill Creek Alliance work restoring our riparian corridor. So please, Bruce.
Thank you, Scott. This presentation on restoring our riparian corridor focuses on just one technique: willow live staking. Live staking has many benefits. It stabilizes stream banks and river banks, reduces erosion and sedimentation, enhances wildlife habitat, increases streamside canopy for cooler water, less algae, establishes a foothold for other plants that also provide wildlife food and shelter, filters or absorbs pollutants, especially excess nutrients, beautifies the waterway, and takes in carbon dioxide while putting out oxygen, which helps in our epic struggle with climate change. Now, Travis, when I am ready for the next slide, I'll ring the bell. A big advantage of willow live staking is cost. For practically nothing, you can harvest hundreds of willow live steaks alongside a local stream, river, wetland, or pond. That's what we are doing here along the Horseshoe Bend of the Great Miami River at Heritage Park in Colerain Township. You see volunteer harvesters on Willow Island, which is reached by canoe during high flows or by hip waders during low flows. Look closer and you can tell that willow live staking harvesting is basically an exercise in woody plant pruning. We are not eliminating a plant community, we're just setting it up for fuller growth. The near bucket shows the product of our labors, willow stakes, or willow live stakes. The far bucket has some of the tools of the trade. Plenty of federal, state, and local guidance can be found on willow live stakes. They all emphasize that you distinguish the two ends of the stake by cutting the bottom at a 45-degree angle while making it flat across the top. Excellent guidance is also available from the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District, which provided the drawings and text that follow. Here again is the slant bottom, flat top rule. I like how they describe ideal stake thickness. Most anything no smaller in circumference than your pinky or no larger around than your thumb. Ideal length approximates the reach of your arm. While looking for straight, healthy stakes to harvest, you also want to see willow buds on your specimens. Try to cut just beyond the branch bark ridge to leave behind a healthy willow plant. There are various forms of advice on how to soak willow live stakes during the period between cutting and planting. On this topic, the experts do not always agree. Here are recommendations of the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Upon the advice of Sarah Meadows at Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District, I believe in the benefits of a moisture control product. It helps keep your stakes alive until planting, which is also known as posting or installation. The Conservation District's installation guidelines are an expression of common sense. Make sure several willow buds remain above the soil so they can sprout leaves. Those willow buds below soil turn into roots. Figure out where the water table lies and be sure to drive the stakes deep enough to reach the underground moisture. Set the stake perpendicular to the stream bank slope. Here's an illustrative cross-section of willow live stakes that have successfully sprouted after installation. Try not to install your stakes like a row of soldiers standing at attention, but rather aspire to a zigzag pattern within the confines of your planting site. Spacing can be nearly as short as your boot or as long as your leg. Frayed stake tops are a no-no. Prune them off. A satisfying feature of willow live staking is the chance to use good old-fashioned hand tools for honest manual labor. These tools let you escape from screens, keyboards, computerized nuisances, pandemics, and politics. No surprise here, lopping shears are the prime tool for cutting stakes off mature willow shrubs and trees. But don't forget the hand pruning shears to speed up your detail work on skinnier stakes. In a pinch, wire cutters or stout scissors will do. Here's my next tool purchase. The ratchet feature should double my cutting capability. The price, $24. Sometimes you want a pruning saw to bring a stake-laden willow branch down to working level. Pruning saws also yield willow posts that are thicker than your thumb. Though not generally recommended, such posts have their uses in some places. These tools will help you pound live stakes into the ground. If the stream substrate, oh, sorry, Travis. If the stream substrate is soft and sandy enough, you may succeed at installing the stake without making a pilot hole first. It is best to hit a live stake with a hard rubber mallet or a plastic-coated dead blow hammer. Metal sledgehammers are best for making pilot holes by brute force. And you want a metal rod of some sort to open that pilot hole. Many people settle for 2 or 3 foot lengths of iron rebar. I'm partial to the concrete form stake because it's smoother, made out of steel, easier to drive into the ground, harder to bend irreparably, and comes with little holes for improvising a wire pulling handle at the top of the stake, which you can barely see here. While installing live stakes, you'll need your shears again to cut off frayed tops or excess length above ground. When installing thicker live stakes, I want these thick chisels nearby in case I'm dealing with a tighter, more resistant soil and substrate. Automation speeds the work, but beware. When that auger bit snags a big underground rock, the drill motor can be twisted right out of your hands. Sometimes you need to excavate surface rocks out of the way. The pickaxe end of the mattock can quickly make pilot holes for shorter stakes. We sometimes bring shovels to a live staking event if we want to also plant a few bare root tree seedlings or potted shrubs. The S-biner mounts a smaller hand tool on your belt or your belt loop. The tape measure helps with live stake site selection. The hedge trimmers create live stake whips for sticking in soft mud. And that gray bar is a carborundum stone for sharpening tools. Dual blades lead to incomplete, sloppy cuts and stripping bark. Brightly colored adhesive tapes will help you quickly find your hand tools as you move from one place to another. The plastic marking tape can help you flag the locations of advanced pilot holes. Good guidance is found in the thick engineering field handbook by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Or you can learn much from a 2-page fact sheet by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. A variety of local organizations are heeding the call of willow live staking. Live staking is definitely on the agenda for this gang. If you want to give willow live staking a try, here's your chance. And it's kind of small, so I'll read parts of it, even though you're literate. It's 10 a.m. tomorrow, Sunday, March 14th, at Twin Creek Preserve, which is up in Sharonville, south of Crescentville Road. The address, in case you want to Google map it, is 12070 Best Place, zip code 45241. So people will start arriving at 10 a.m. And here's my contact information. All done. Thanks for listening.
I loved every part of that presentation. Thank you, Bruce. That was fabulous. And it brought me back to grade school with that bell too. That was pretty cool. I love the lo-fi approach. And I wanted to add the genus, the willow genus, Salix, is one of the most fascinating, underrated genuses out there. So read up on that. It's also one of the very best pollinator host plants that you can possibly find. So now we're going to move to the previously mentioned, Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District. We'll hear from Adam Lehman, who will talk about the Copper Creek Initiative. Adam, you there?
Sorry about that.
I'm here. Does everyone hear me? We sure can.
All right. Let me share my screen here. I threw into the comments, by the way, that was a great presentation, Bruce. I wanted to point out that at the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District YouTube website, we've recently put out 2 instructional videos, one on harvesting live sticks and one on installing them. So that's a good resource for folks who are interested. I'm trying to maximize here. All right. So this group all knows of the many co-benefits associated with a healthy urban and suburban tree canopy, particularly in residential contexts. But today I want to talk about one in particular, stormwater benefits. I'm a watershed manager, right? And so I've been tasked with improving stream health in Hamilton County. And I'm lucky enough that, we are a county that is incredibly data rich, and we have a pretty good handle on, the biological habitat and chemical condition of our streams. And so we know what the problem is. And by far the most widespread impairment of in-stream biology in Hamilton County, and really in the urban and suburban world, is urban hydrologic alteration. All right, and so I don't want to get too into this. I got 10 minutes, but there's kind of 2 phases of this. Impacts to base flow because of reduced ground water infiltration when we cover the world in impervious surfaces. And so this is particularly a problem in headwaters, which constitute about 85% of the stream miles in Ohio and in most places of similar topography. And so, I mean, in a lot of headwaters, when that leads to streams going completely dry between rain events when they otherwise would not, that's a complete loss of aquatic habitat, and perhaps among the most egregious impacts to local streams. The other side of this is increased frequency of erosive, flashy flows that churn up the substrate, are a direct impact to in-stream biota, but also destroy the habitat as well, right? So this is a widespread problem. It's also the most foundational problem, right? When in watershed management, we rely on this paradigm that stream functions are built upon other more foundational functions. And if you want to restore one kind of higher level function, you first have to address all the lower lying things. And so I like to point out that, if the stream goes dry in between rain events, there are no fish to care about the nutrient levels in that stream and various water quality concerns. So we have to, this diagram here kind of shows basically an order of operations for watershed restoration. Now, I've been tasked with improving stream health in the county. I look around at this densely developed area, and quite frankly, it's a bit overwhelming, right? The question rises, is it even feasible to mitigate hydrologic alteration to a biologically relevant extent in densely developed watersheds? And that's an open question, and it's obviously one with major implications for my life. And so what we're doing is we're seeking to answer that question in exactly the same manner that one would have to address it, right? Whether you're trying to do the research or you're trying to restore the watershed, when you have such a massive undertaking as restoring the hydrology to places that have 50% impervious surface coverage, you got to work at one place at a time until in-stream objectives are met. And so that's what we're doing with the Cooper Creek Collaborative and the demonstration watershed. We are kind of a group of several organizations that you can see listed here that have gathered around this idea of laser-focused work on mitigating hydrologic alteration in this one place until we meet in-stream objectives. So those objectives are hydrologic first, but ultimately biological. And so when you're taking on an endeavor like this, you know, you don't just say we're going to go build rain gardens, right? This is an all of the above, throw the kitchen sink at this approach. And you can see this spectrum of projects that we are pursuing. And if anyone has an interest, I'd encourage you to check out coopercreek.org to learn more. But today it's the tree summit, right? So we're here to talk about one of our initiatives, which is urban reforestation. So we are endeavoring to plant 1,500 trees in this 1 square mile area in 5 years. This is almost primarily single family residential, pretty darn dense. As I mentioned, it's 50% impervious surface coverage. So this means private property, right? So we're giving this stuff away to private property owners, but we're also working with the township to implement some street tree plantings as well. So it's a mix of those things. We're going to be tracking our progress. We've kind of got a rudimentary iTree hydro model at this point. Everything we do in the demonstration watershed, we're tracking hydrologic impact in stream, right? So this will ultimately, we're trying to figure out how to interact this iTree hydro model with our SWIM model. So this project, you know, we're still looking at how impactful this is going to be for the hydrology. This is a long-term investment, right? When we talk about mitigating hydrology with trees, by far the main component of that is interception, right? So that is obviously tightly linked to canopy cover area. So we're planning for 20, 30 years out when these trees get big. So this is a long-term investment in stormwater management in the community. But it kind of got bumped up to the front of the line. This is perhaps the third project that we've really got on the ground in the watershed, because it's such a great way to reach out to the community, right? So many other co-benefits. People want this. And just to kind of put a point on that, we sent a survey out to every single landowner in the demonstration watershed in 2019. And we got 130, so that's 1,700 mailers we sent out. We got 1,700, I think, is the correct answer. I don't know what I said. We got 137 replies requesting more than 300 trees. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge number, but for anyone who's done survey mailers, that's a pretty darn good return on your investment for one mailer to 1,700 people, right? So that's kind of that based on how many street tree locations there are is what led us to that 1,500 tree goal that we're shooting for. So this is our first year that we're going to get some trees into the ground thanks to Duke Energy Foundation. We're going to get about 250 trees in the ground this year. We've got other applications out there. We're going to be applying for about 4 different funding sources each year. In this map here, I can't really see it because my Zoom is covering it, but so the yellow lines are the street trees approved by the township for this year. The black polygons are the parcels where people have requested trees. We got an existing canopy cover there that we had digitized by a graduate student, and those pink dots represent the potential street tree planting location. So I know we're crunched for time. Before I stop babbling at y'all, I want to definitely give some recognition to two partners. OKI has been instrumental on this. As you can imagine, giving away 1,500 trees and planting them for them. That's something worth noting, right? We want to make sure that these trees are going in appropriate places and being planted in an appropriate manner to ensure maximize survivorship. And so, you know, getting out there and actually doing that is a huge logistical lift. OKI is helping us to create a map-based registration platform to handle the logistics of that. So we couldn't do it without that. And I'll note that we've contracted with Groundwork Ohio River Valley to plant the tree. So we've got some kind of budding green industry youths benefiting from the project. That's all I got.
Adam, that's fantastic. Really cool project. Thank you for sharing that with us. We'll proceed straight on to Liz Fett from the Northern Kentucky Urban and Community Forestry Council. Liz?
Hi, yep.
Okay, thanks.
I'm working on sharing. Maybe. Potentially. Hi, everyone. As Scott said, my name is Elizabeth Fett. I am a president of the Northern Kentucky Urban Community and Forestry Council. We are a subchapter of Taking Root, but we do most of our work in the Northern Kentucky area, Boone, Campbell, and Kenton counties. You may know our council from the Reforest Northern Kentucky program that we have, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. I just wanted to give some few updates and perhaps let people know who we are and what kind of programs we have. We recently updated our website, so if you go to our website, there might be some broken links and things. So email us, let us know, we'll fix it. Our website guru Megan is awesome. So, all right. So, sorry, the Zoom is in my way. We collaborate with a lot of different partners. One of our programs, we're collaborating with Groundwork Ohio River Valley with Tanner and Dr. Chrissy Hoffensberger from NKU. So they are going out to the past reforest sites, looking at how the soil composition changes over time, pre and post plantings, and they're doing some amazing work. This also introduces all these students to forestry monitoring and maintenance programs. And like Greg was saying earlier, we need to get these young kids out there learning about trees, knowing that there are different avenues in the forestry world. And also just to love trees. We've collected this data since 2005, and thanks to the Center for Environmental Restoration, last year we were able to get the 2020 data because of all the different things with universities being closed and open and all that kind of stuff. So we're planning on collecting more data this year. So another thing that we like to do too is do tree walks in different neighborhoods and looking at different trees. Chris always has great stories of what the tree is and, you know, cultivars and various things and where it should grow. We had a great one in Bellevue, but unfortunately last year we couldn't do that. So we did a watch party and we watched Intelligent Trees. It's a documentary with, I can't quite remember her last name, but it's Dr. Susan. And she talked about how trees communicate using the mycorrhizal network. It's pretty awesome. So kind of adapted our normal tree crawls or tree pub crawls to watching. We also have an urban tree canopy. It is about 5 to 6 years old, but we still actively use it. I just talked to Chris, and Kenton County is using it as part of its to inform their master plan. We're looking to update it since it is 5 to 6 years old. So, you know, financially or technical support would be great. If you go to our website, you can take a look at it. The link currently is broken because we're shifting who houses that, but please feel free, take a look at it, you know, use it how you want. And then also our public workers tree seminar is a very popular popular day. We didn't have one last year, but keep an eye out for announcements. We're planning on one for fall 2020. So we typically have speakers and then maybe some demonstrations. We'll see how things shape out by the fall. If there are any topics, if anybody's looking for CEUs, we tend to do CEUs for this seminar, let us know. I mean, we're always looking for ideas. Our biggest program is Reforest Northern Kentucky, and I want to give a special recognition to Rhonda. She has done an amazing job at being chair of the committee this year, and last year we had to shift our usual plantings, and they coordinated along with the entire Reforest committee, coordinated a trunk or tree. So we gave away tons of trees. We also we were also able to plant the trees in Boone County. We're going on 13 years now, 40 acres, which is awesome. So yay, trees. So last year we had 146 cars come through, gave away 400 seedlings. And then later in the summer, we planted 125 trees. It's not the usual amount we plant, but they were much larger trees, you know, big 10, 20 gallon size trees. I encourage everyone to join us in April for also a trunk or tree. So come through, we'll give you a couple seedlings. And then for our fall planting, we're still working on the dates for that. And that'll be in Newport this year. So Campbell County. And that's really it. It's just a short and sweet update. Please visit us at our website, email us, and also come out to any and all the events. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really great. And yeah, I've participated in some of those tree plantings and things, and they're always just a great fun day. And the workers sessions are so informative. So great work there. We're going to go back to John Hawley with Purdue Extension, Dearborn County, for a short presentation.
Hey guys, I apologize for the audio earlier. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's still kind of poor. So if you speak a little slowly, I think we'll be better able to hear.
Okay, so sorry about that, Scott. So I'm trying to share here. Click my screen. Good to see everyone. All right, if you can't see that, let me know. So as Scott mentioned earlier, my name is John Hawley with Purdue Extension here in nearby Dearborn County. Towns of Lawrenceburg, Greendale, Aurora may come to mind. If you haven't visited us, we'd love to see you sometime. As far as our local forest and tree initiatives, as a county extension service, obviously, we're oftentimes focused on agricultural projects. But Dearborn County is a veteran community. The rest of our state and much of Ohio as well, I'm sure, very focused on corn and soybean production, things like that. But I'm proud to say we have a lot of great local tree and forest initiatives. I mentioned this earlier when discussing my predecessor. You know, we're a service for a reason, and so we work with clients of all backgrounds. You know, I get calls from folks that live in apartments. I get calls from folks that own 200 acres. A lot of times our tree-related consultations are related to basic assessment, so identification of trees, site recommendations for plantings, management of existing plantings, and et cetera. So I include a picture on this slide, and I'm sure many of the tree experts on the call are shaking their heads and just hate seeing that, but that is our notorious blue spruce. Probably the most common question I receive in my office ever. I probably get 20 to 30 at least questions about blue spruce throughout the year. Other services we offer, disease testing. In recent times, oak wilt has been a priority as far as diseases go. So what our staff have done on campus is they have trained the county educators, myself included, and that training is available to all 92 Indiana county educators. And so oftentimes if I'm not trained to identify the oak wilt in the field, you know, you can call another educator in the local area to help that homeowner. And then oftentimes, if it's a question that's above our heads, you know, I have an agricultural education and sciences background. There are many things that when it comes to tree issues that go above my head, we make a lot of referrals to certified arborists when the problems are a little more complex than needle cast in a blue spruce tree. So when those questions go beyond what the scope of our background or something that we can't quite figure out, just like Ohio State, we have a plant and pest diagnostic lab. And the really great thing for local folks is that this service is very inexpensive. For only $11 for an in-state resident or $22 for an out-of-state resident, we can submit a sample for a pest or a tree problem that we simply can identify ourselves. So I send any potential oak wilt samples following a pretty strict procedure to campus to be sure that's actually what I'm seeing and it's actually what I'm able to verify. Because obviously those on the call that know once you diagnose oak wilt, there's action that needs to be taken. But that goes for any other problem. If you have some scale or other sort of pest or insect or disease problems on your trees, we can start with a photo sample and then submit a physical sample, all for a flat $11 fee. It's a really great service to our homeowners. And like I said, the fee does double, but for out of state, if you'd like to work with the Purdue Diagnostic Lab, it's fairly good price. One thing I want to mention as far as local tree initiatives, just a short 2-hour drive west on US 50 out of Cincinnati will land you at the Southeast Purdue Agricultural Center. Once again, I mentioned that a lot of our initiatives in extension are focused on corn and soybean, things like that. So why am I telling you about the Agricultural Center? Well, the Agricultural Center has roughly 1,600 acres of a timber base that is currently on several different research projects. I mentioned oak wilt already. There's an extensive, I think, regional oak wilt research project going on. There's a lot of other research being done. In fact, the last time I was up there a couple weeks ago, they were looking at some veneer logs, and yes, they do sell a lot of that to fund the research there and to fund the facility itself. But oftentimes they'll be identifying pests or other problems. And so there's a lot of really interesting research going on. For those on the call, if you're ever interested in learning more, you can see my colleague there, Joel Wallman. He'd be happy to help you. I'd also be happy to set up a tour or a meeting to teach you a little bit more or to show you a little bit more about what we can offer you at what we call CPAC. So getting a little more local again, here in Dearborn County and the surrounding Southeast Indiana area, our Master Gardener Association is very busy on tree and other similar initiatives. So what you're seeing here is the historic Vance Townsley House. This is just one of our many projects. This is actually the culmination of a project that was completed about 10 years ago in partnership with some graduate students on campus at Purdue. And there had been no landscaping here at all. In fact, around the Vance Townsley House, you see that field to the right of the photo. That's kind of what it looked like, and it did not serve the house justice. And so, there was a very innovative and, research-based project conducted to improve the landscaping around. And our gardeners still work on that project as far as plant labeling, management, testing, things like that. Improving the irrigation on site, all sorts of really neat things. And it's a nice educational demo. It's right there in downtown Lawrenceburg. The casino is actually probably just about, 2/3 of a mile from that site right there. And so there's a lot of foot traffic. People get to come by and see what our gardeners are working on, and we're really proud of that. Other initiatives, a lot of things obviously still going virtual in extension. You see a lot of things on there that aren't necessarily related to tree and forest initiatives, but we do a lot of lunch and learn type programs for those with busy schedules. These webinars are always recorded and placed on our YouTube channel. You can search Purdue Extension YouTube or Purdue Extension Dearborn County on YouTube. And a lot of these, videos are based in topics I think that are relevant to many of your clientele. So we always appreciate, just like Ohio State, just like Kentucky, sharing these extension resources. We bring experts in for a reason. And so for the case of our fruit tree basics, we bring someone that's actually worked in an orchard to actually teach some of these things. And so we're always proud of these virtual programs. And obviously we're, beyond the current conditions of our country, I think we'll be doing a lot of virtual programming moving forward. Going into more local initiatives still, and I know we're short on time, so I'll go quickly. I'm really proud to be working with our Soil and Water Conservation District. I know Hamilton County Soil and Water was mentioned here a minute ago. In Dearborn County, we've got a really great team. They partner with us on a lot of things. They also host a really great native plant sale. We strongly encourage our master gardeners to serve as kind of liaisons for this program. They often volunteer to help out as far as pickup and things. We've also taken extra plants that are ordered and put them into kind of demo plots. I know a couple of years ago we planted some downy skullcap at a site we have in Aurora, and we're still monitoring that as far as a perennial wildflower, and doing some pollinator research and things like that. And then recently, working with Soil and Water and a few other groups, we reestablished our CISMA, our Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And we're starting small because everyone's pulled so thin and stretched so thin, I should say. But we're starting small with a weed wrangle at one of our county parks on April 10th, and we're really proud of that. A lot of great work goes into these weed wrangles. They're rather simple events, especially when you're focused on weeds like garlic mustard, because they're easy to spot that time of year. But we're really excited about some of these initiatives moving forward. And with that, kind of what I'll conclude on is mentioning our county park system. In extension, you often wear a lot of hats. So in the state of Indiana, I actually sit on our county park board as a permanent member by state statute, or I should say county statute in this case. And so our county parks are very rural for the most part in Dearborn County. We do have a park in suburban Bright, Indiana. But just like the Southeast Purdue Ag Center, we manage several hundred acres of forested land in rural Dearborn County. And so we've gone through, responsible harvesting of over mature trees. We've put trails in, and I've provided consultations on how to, at least reduce the chance of invasive species taking over. We've done invasive species removal. We also have a county farm park where our farmer there has helped us with invasive removal and control. So Dearborn County Parks, we'd love to come see. We've got walking trails, fishing, etc. And you'll see a lot more coming as far as tree initiatives and other forest management. So with that, I hope I didn't take too much time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions for folks that reach out to us.
Thank you, John. Great work out there in Indiana. I'd like to move along now to the Trees Make a Difference team, and two of Wyoming, Ohio's finest, two wonderful ladies, Gail Fickenclark and Bobby Strangfeld.
Thanks, Scott. Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Lovely. All right. We did a little run through with Travis, and we had some problems. I wasn't sure that they were actually fixed, but that's great. So here I am again, talking about one of my favorite things, the Make a Difference Day tree plantings and the tree sale we have associated with it. This is one of the feel-good events of my year, and I look forward to it. Next slide, please. When we originally founded the team, we wanted a very concise effort. Planting trees on National Make a Difference Day, a single day in the best season for tree planting, seemed to fit the bill. It's always the fourth Saturday in October, and this year the date is October 22nd. Over time, we've embellished on our functions, adding things that will help people understand and value trees. Our yearly tree sale is a way to allow even cash-strapped individuals and communities to plant trees. We decided early on that this will not be a fundraising event. We offer trees at wholesale prices with a little bit added for shipping. The reason is the result is our buyers get high quality trees, native trees, at very reasonable costs. Another thing we hope to do is encourage people to register their new trees with Taking Root. Registrations seem to be falling over time, and I want to encourage all of you to register your new trees. Taking Root was founded with the express goal of 2 million trees by 2020. But of course, while there might have been millions planted, we can't know that unless people register. Next slide, please. I said that it was a happy event for me in the year, and this is a nice family saying that with this picture that they are having a happy day too with their new little tree. Everybody that plants a tree tends to look like this, smiling and happy that they've got something new that will live in their yard. Next slide, please. We started this effort in 2014 to supplement the efforts of Taking Root. Based on registration numbers in the early years and our tree sale numbers, it looks as like we have planted almost 2,800 trees in our 5 years of existence. And in our first year, we won an award from the National Make a Difference Day Foundation. We've squirreled away that money and even now are using it to advance our efforts. Slide, please. Last year was our 5-year anniversary, and adding to the value of the native trees we supply, we took note of Doug Tallamy's and the National Wildlife Foundation's work to provide good wildlife habitat with trees. Doug has specifically researched which trees provide the most insect larvae to feed birds and other wildlife. Without this vital link between plants and wildlife fauna, the chain between living things that produce food from the energy of the sun and the web of beings that use that food created from sunlight would be broken and our wildlife would become extinct. Oaks are the native trees with the largest insect hosting capabilities, so we always have at least one oak in our sale. This year, we had larger overall selection of plants. This was because one of our regular patrons asked for it. So if you can see an improvement to our plant offerings, let us know, please. Next slide, please. And of course, we have been very fortunate to have wonderful partners. Next slide. This year, for the first time, we were able to obtain plants from Boyer Farm, the property owned by the Cincinnati Zoo in Warren County. They propagate a wonderful variety of native plants there under the direction of Brian Jorg. Next slide. And of course, our first partner, Dave Gressley and the Spring Grove Cemetery and Arboretum. They've provided us with expert advice, a place to meet, and a location for the plant sale to happen. Our plant sale probably wouldn't have happened without Spring Grove and Dave. Next slide. Another long-term partner is Great Parks of Hamilton County. In addition to some of our team members being employed by the parks, for the last few years, park employees have helped us unload our increasingly large orders from the supplier. This is a huge and now essential partnership. Slide, please. And I want to acknowledge the Wyoming Skyline, who, when they heard what we were doing locally, put it up on their sign for everybody to see. Thank you, Skyline. Last, a huge thanks to Woody Warehouse for enthusiastically helping a bunch of newbies to navigate wholesale tree purchasing and delivery the first year, and for being there for us, providing perfect inventory each and every year. Next slide. And now I want to turn this over to Bobby, who's the chair of the Wyoming Beautification and Urban Forestry Commission, to tell you what's been happening in our little town.
Hi. Hi, this is Bobby Strangfeld. I am the co-chair of Make a Difference Day and the chairman of Urban Forestry for Wyoming, Ohio. Travis, could you please put my picture on instead of Gail's?
It is. When you're speaking, you're on.
Oh, am I? Okay, sorry. And I would like to thank Taking Root too for awarding the City of Wyoming the John Peasley Award. I want to share how Stearns Woods, a 10-acre donated parcel of land in Wyoming, has directly benefited from Taking Root. After close to 10 years of volunteer-driven, invasive plant removal, tree removal, and intermittent native tree planting at Stearns Woods, we received a Taking Root mini grant that gave us the funds to organize a focused community understory tree planting during the Make a Difference Day tree planting in October of 2020. We had the Wyoming volunteers, the Taking Root mini grant money, and the great and the Make a Difference Day tree sale to supply the native trees that we needed. These were the ingredients we needed to get us into our understory redevelopment phase. Next slide, please. Next slide. One more, please. Next slide. Thank you. The map. I have to see the map. The map was our guide to success. We used our map to determine what plants to use and where to plant them. And we kept our map busy and active by planting in 6 different locations on one day. Dogwoods and elderberries, good plants. We planted dogwoods and elderberries, good plants for long transition areas. Buttonbush along a creek to deter erosion. Pawpaw used in an open area to stabilize a hillside. Bottlebush buckeye planted in an area adjacent to an existing community of them to help us slow stormwater runoff. All plants suited to perform well in these locations and having high insect hosting numbers per Doug Tallamy research. All in all, 16 volunteers and kids, 87 plants into the ground, and in 2 hours on Make a Difference Day 2020. Next slide, please. The following slides are of happy volunteers planting in the dirt. Next slide, please. More planting in Stearns Woods. We planted pawpaws and we planted some dogwoods. Next slide, please. Thank you all, thank you for all the volunteer tree plantings that got us to where we are today. Next slide, please. More happy faces. These are pictures of the OKI region where we have our Make a Difference Day community tree planting each fall. And the following pictures are of people in the OKI region planting trees. Next slide, please. Great Parks, Boone County Arboretum. Next slide, please. More planting in Northern Kentucky. Next slide, please. You might see a familiar face if you look at all the pictures hard. Next slide, please. And here is the original team, the Make a Difference Day team, saying thank you. And our team has changed a little bit, but we're still saying thank you for the Southwest area of Ohio for supporting our tree planting initiatives. Thank you, Taking Root. Next slide, please. You can contact us at mad@takingroot.info and let us know how your tree is doing. Send us a photo of your tree or trees with a note of what year they were planted. We will choose our favorite photo and award a free tree to you this fall in October. Thank you very much.
And thank you to both Gail and Bobby, the forces of nature behind this great initiative that is now in its 5th, 6th year. Which is it, Bobby?
It's 6th.
6th year. Congratulations. Very good. Thank you for all you've done. I'm privileged now to introduce another force of nature, Nancy Linz, who is the founder of the Ohio Native Plant Month. Got it through all the various levels of government and made it happen, and it will happen in a few days. April is Native Plant Month, and here is Nancy to tell us more.
Hey, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Pat, for asking me to talk today. Actually, now that I've been through the process of passing legislation in the state of Ohio, I know why I'm a gardener and I'm not a legislator. I mean, it just totally makes sense to me. Anyway, about a year and a half, Governor Mike DeWine signed legislation making the month of April Ohio Native Plant Month. And that was kind of exciting. And as a matter of fact, since then we've learned that Ohio might be the only state in the country to have a law designating an entire month to native plants. which is really exciting. So Ohio is leading the way, not only in that kind of legislation, but we have so many great organizations and efforts going on around native plants that we're definitely a leader in this area. So last year, being our first official Native Plant Month, and COVID hit and kind of slowed everything down a little bit last April, we set out on a goal to try to ask people across the state of Ohio to plant 100,000 trees and tell us about them. So plant 100,000 native trees or shrubs and write to tell us about them. And after COVID hit, we thought, well, this might not happen, but we were surprised by the end of the year, people wrote to tell us about almost 200,000 trees they had planted in the state of Ohio. And we were very excited about this. As a matter of fact, we were only about 15,000 short of 200,000. So my partner, Hope Taft, who spoke with you guys last year, said, well, I think we should go for it. So this year we're going for 200,000 is our magic number. So any of you guys out there that plant native trees, and I've been listening to the talks here, we've got Gail was just talking about Make a Difference Day, October 22nd this year. When you guys plant trees, would you please write and tell me about it? And we've got Adam out there with tree forestation at Cooper Creek, more great trees and willow saplings. I think there are more I could learn about. As a matter of fact, when Hope spoke to you guys last year, you planted, I think, a white oak during your meeting or after your meeting or something. And did you know that's the only tree from taking root that made it in our tree tally from last year? So that 15,000 that we're short might have been yours, I'm thinking. But anyway, if you could all, when you plant trees, write and tell me. It's got to be a native tree or a woody shrub, so that includes all the amelanchiers and the wonderful viburnums and those types of things. But write and tell us. The way you can tell us is you can either send me a Gmail, which is Ohio Native Plant Month @gmail, and it'll come straight to me, or go to our website, www.ohionativeplantmonth.org. There's a contact us sheet, and just shoot it off to me. That comes right to my inbox and say, hey, Nancy, I just planted a bur oak seedling that I started 2 years ago and I put it in my garden. If you want to look at all the ones that were planted last year, go to our website. There's a page out there for our 2020 100,000 tree challenge. And I list every single person that wrote me. They're in alphabetical order. And I tell you how many trees that they planted. And that goes into our grand tally. So this year we're going for 200,000. And with your help, let's do it. I got something else to tell you about, though, that's kind of exciting. I've been working the last year with Senator Portman to try to get him to pass some legislation to make April National Native Plant Month. And so far, I found out in January of this year that Senator Portman's willing to be the lead Republican sponsor of that legislation. He only introduces legislation that's bipartisan. So we just found out about a week ago that Senator Mazie Hirono from Hawaii has offered to be our Democrat co-lead sponsor of the legislation. This coming Monday, it gets introduced before the Senate. So it's moving very, very quickly. It gets introduced before the Senate. It'll be assigned a number, assigned a committee. A committee looks it over. Now, this is not a law, it's a resolution. It's just a resolution that says this April of 2021 is National Native Plant Month. And we're assuming that in the next 2 weeks, we should hear whether that's a go or not. The legislation was written and many different groups approved the wording of this resolution, including Dr. Talamay. I worked with him heavily on the wording of this. But we also have different groups that have supported this, including these are native plant societies that are statewide, of course, Ohio's, but we have Washington State, Oregon, California, Florida, North Carolina, and several other state native plant societies that are supporting this legislation. We have Keep Ohio Beautiful, but also Keep America Beautiful, National Audubon, as well as many local Audubon chapters like Great Lakes Audubon Chapter, Nature Conservancy, and many others, including, thanks to Scott and Brian and Steve, the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens. So they're listed as a sponsor for this legislation as well. So thanks to all of you who have helped to get this thing going. It's moving very quickly. We're still hoping April of 2021 is the first National Native Plant Month. And think of it as an opportunity for education. That's how I think of it. It doesn't belong to any one group or organization. It's really created so that all of the groups that are out there, including Make a Difference Day and all of the wonderful soil and water conservation districts and universities and schools, can use it as an opportunity to educate. Talk about the benefits of native plants, plan programs, hikes, removal of invasives, the plantings of natives, and especially trees, because those are my passion. But it's an opportunity for us to pull together in April and educate and do projects and plan projects for the year. So Ohio forever and always, because we're based on a law, it has April as Ohio Native Plant Month. But nationally this April, we're hoping, and we should hear in the next couple of weeks, hopefully it will be National Native Plant Month. And then we plan to renew this resolution every year. So just like Arbor Day and some of the other resolutions that get renewed every year, we're planning on renewing this for the foreseeable future. And I'd love help rallying around this and getting the word out that let's celebrate native plants in April, plan activities, and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. That's a great report. It's very encouraging and very, very cool. And thanks for all the hard work. I can't imagine how many hours you have put into all of this. And you probably don't want to think about it either.
That's the reason I'm a gardener. I mean,
all good stuff. Hey, we have got an august group of presenters still with us here. We've got Travis, me, Nancy, Bobby, Gail, John, Sue, Teresa, Pat, Chris Stone, and Elizabeth. And we will gladly take on a little bit of an open discussion time and maybe some of these questions. So this is your chance to get some questions, and it looks like I only really have one right now from Molly. Does anyone know if Kentucky has a similar statewide tree planting effort? There's Trees Louisville and Tree Lexington, but I don't know of anything statewide. Chris, that might be yours.
I'm not aware of anything other than the groups that she just mentioned. And of course, up here, we have the Taking Root in collaboration with Northern Kentucky Urban Forestry Council.
Yeah.
But that's all I know of.
So we do have this great group of presenters. Does anybody have anything to add from our earlier discussions or questions of your own? Did we answer everything? Did we cover it that well? Anonymous attendee. I know them. They think, it's a thank you to all the presenters for the information they shared and the work they are doing. I agree with that one. And now Emily is asking, is everyone aware of the upcoming issue of invasive jumping worms in our region? They are harmful to forests and have been found here. Who can answer that? Yeah, I've heard the rumor about that and things, but I have not heard any specifics.
they've been found in a county in central Ohio. There was if you Google it, there's some really good information out there, but they're only found in, I think, one county like central Ohio-ish. Joe Boggs, I think, wrote a biggle on it. So I would definitely search Joe Boggs's work and see, but I think he did a piece on that last year, Scott. So you might check that out. But if you Google it, it talks about why they're so harmful and how they're just so prolific, and they tend to go very, very shallow in the soils, and they displace and get rid of a lot of our native worms. And they're really causing a lot of devastation to habitat wherever they reside. So it's important we learn to recognize them and do what we can to eradicate them so they don't wipe out our native species. But look for that biggle.
Okay, that's very good. All right, well, we've kind of hit our time mark here, and Pat Greason has some closing remarks. And we'll go to that. Pat, are you there?
I am. Travis, could you put up our final slides? I'd like to again thank today's event sponsors, Natorp's Nursery, Keystone Flora, Quail Ridge Specimen Trees for their wonderful support of the event today. And I'd also like to offer special thanks to the Cincinnati Zoo, Green Vision Professional Services, OKI Regional Government, Trees Atlanta, Purdue Extension, Mill Creek Yacht Club, the Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District, the University of Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky Urban Forestry Council, the April is Ohio Native Plant Month, and Make a Difference Day. I'd also like to thank all of our speakers today, Greg Levine and Judy Yee with Trees Atlanta, Teresa Cully with the University of Cincinnati. Thank you for giving up your Saturday morning for us. Our great presenters today, Bruce Kohler with the Mill Creek Alliance, Adam Lehman with Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation District, Liz Fett with Northern Kentucky Urban and Community Forestry Council, John Hawley with Purdue Extension, Trees Make a Difference team, Gail Ficken-Clark and Bobby Strangfeld, and Nancy Lenz with Ohio Native Plant Month. Scott, thank you for being our MC today.
I enjoyed it.
Always, it is a pleasure to have you back with us, and we really appreciate everything that you've done. And for our visual host, Travis, thank you for keeping this on track and keeping everything moving today. We are hoping to go to a live event for 2022 as everything starts to open up. We're already hearing about conferences starting to come to fruition for this summer. So we hope to be with you in a live format for next year. Until then, please make sure that you are registering your trees on our website so that we can get a count of those trees and keep the tree numbers going up. Thank you again for being attendees. We thank you for your generous support of our organization. Have a great spring.